long days, pleasant nights, and welcome to Kingslingers, a Doof Media podcast journeying through Stephen King's Dark Tower series. My name is constant reader Scott Daly, and my favorite fruit of the wizard's rainbow is the pomegranate.
And I'm King Newbie, Matt Freeman, and my favorite fruit of the wizard's rainbow is the tomato.
Matt, you can't...
Is it a fruit, Scott?
I mean, yes, technically, but Merlin's grapefruit and Merlin's tomato? Seriously?
You told me to pick a fruit. I picked a fruit.
I hate you. This week we are covering chapters 5, 6, and 7 of Wizard and Glass Part 3, Come Reap. Our game of castles is set, and both sides are making their last moves before the final showdown will finally begin. But Jonas and his crew strike first, and strike decisively. Roland and his Ka-tet are arrested and framed for the murder of Mayor Thorin and Counselor Reimer, and Merlin's grapefruit is back in the hands of the good man's men, and Rhea herself has now formally allied herself with Jonas and his gang. It's looking bad, Matt. This is a week's reading of looking real bad. Mm-hmm. What did you think of it?
It's popping off. Like you said, there's so many great little moments. You know, we bring the characters together, we bring them closer to that goal, and then we have sort of the catastrophe happen, right? The big part of the plot where all of the tension culminates, and then, I mean, it's I don't want to say anticlimactic because it certainly didn't fall on me the wrong way. It was just like it's then set up for them to be amazing, clever badasses this whole book, and then the way that they're just captured without fanfare is actually kind of hilarious when it lands.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, like they made all these plans. They were so good. They were ahead of the game the whole time, and then bam. And I think Jonas even comments on like capturing them was easier than like picking up a baby or something. Yeah. Like he's like shocked at how easy it was. And it was really easy. Like that, no fighting, they didn't do anything real special. They just did like a double fake out that worked perfectly. And then boom, done.
Yeah. They lost their game of castles, or at least they appear to be in a bad spot.
Sure. Yeah. It's exciting. This is one of those ones where, like, I've said this before, but I don't actually take the time to go through and read the whole book before I made the chapter delineations for our weeks. I just really divide it by number of pages and try to do it in the way that gives about the same number of pages we cover each week. But I love where this one left off because I know what happens next. And I think this is really like a perfect, like, you know, we have the last planning, we have the calm before the storm, and then we have Jonas makes his move, and then we're left like saying, okay, shit, now what? I think it's a really great place to stop. And I know it's probably torturous for you, but that I enjoy that. Yeah,
I mean, it's about as torturous as it ever is, right? I'm definitely, I mean, I think I say this more weeks than I don't, but I'm like, as soon as I get off the phone with you, I'm going to go listen immediately. So yeah, it's good. It's a good feeling. It's good to be that invested in a book, right?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, basically my morning routine the night after we record this is I wake up, I edit the episode, and I set the episode up for publishing the following day, and then I read the next part right as soon as I'm done with that. So I am just as anxious, and I know what happens, and I'm just as anxious.
All right.
So let's not waste any more time. Let's get you to your next section to read, Matt, and begin the discussion of this week's reading. We start with Chapter 5, Wizard's Rainbow. And we don't know what that is when we started the chapter, and then we figure it out by the end of it. Our chapter begins 3 days after Roland and Cuthbert confronted Rhea of the Coups. We're in the head of the wonderful and fascinating Roy DePape again as his Ka-tet meets together. But it is not just the three of them anymore, Matt, because Coral Thorin is there as well. And so it seems like her shacking up with Jonas was not just a one-time thing like you and I talked about last week. It seems to be a little bit something more than that. Not only that, but Coral is going to play into their scheming a little bit. It seems like she's kind of joined their Ka-tet.
Yeah, it seems like it. It is very enjoyable how befuddled DePape and Reynolds are by this revelation. They just can't get their heads around this.
Yeah, I mean, they've kind of described her very uncharitably, right? Her looks, Coral's looks. She's not like just this beautiful woman that I think Jonas has talked a lot about. Like he goes after like the pretty ones, right? Like he's always like thinking about the pretty ones that he wants to go after. And even when he decided to go with Coral Thorin, it was kind of like surprising internally for him. He's like, I didn't think I would. All right, whatever.
Yeah.
And it's become something.
Yeah, it seems to be working for him. So
Yeah. So one of my favorite things about experiencing this book with you, Matt, this kind of close reading, is watching all the ways in which King is like doing very specific things with these groups. Specifically in this book, watching the ways in which these opposing Ka-tets are really, really mirroring each other. And I think that's something that has stood out to me in this book more than it ever has in the past, because we have Roland and his group and we have Jonas and his group, and they're the same. Like last week, Roland realized when we left our reading last week, Roland had just realized that Susan is meant to help them. She's not just meant to be this woman he falls in love with them. She's meant to help them. She's meant to be part of this. She's meant to join their Ka-tet. And he'll say that literally in their meeting later in this chapter, that we are Ka-tet. And then, of course, at the same time, another woman, Coral, joins Jonas's group. And there are two. This chapter is basically two meetings. It's Jonas meeting with his group. It's Roland meeting with his group. And those meetings are structurally similar. Like, we are meant to see a mirror image of these two Ka-tets working off against each other. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, and I think it's a bit less clear later on, and I don't want to jump ahead too much, but Jonas's group sort of enlists Rhea at about the same time that Roland's group decides they're going to bring along
Shimi.
Yeah, Shimi. And so that's another parallel in some sense, like the kind of lesser final member. But yeah, we can maybe talk more about that when we actually get there.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right though with the parallels. I hope that we get a chance to talk about, specific moment to moment parallels and also specific contrasts as we go through this week's reading, because I think a lot of these moments are set up where, like you said, the meetings are framed similarly in a way that highlights the differences between the two groups.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in essence, the two sides are meeting for the same purpose, right? They are meeting to make their plans for the coming conflict, but with the other group. And so the ways in which they compare and contrast is really interesting. I think we will dive into those as we go through it.
Yeah.
So we learn, though, that Jonas is frustrated, that his attempts to like annoy and harry the gunslingers have not forced Roland's group out behind their proverbial hillock. But regardless of that, they are moving the tankers out every night. The man in black has left, and Latigo, Farson's man, is here now, and they're here to talk shop. And they kind of go through how everything's going on their end, and they move into talking about Roland and his friends. And Latigo basically says, Farson wants you to treat these men as if they're a serious threat. And Jonas in this moment says, they're not young men, but mere boys. And if they're coming here as Ka, about which I know Farson concerns himself deeply, that it may be our Ka rather than the affiliations. So there's a couple fascinating things about this, Matt. I think the first is that even after his talk with the man in black, with Walter, even after his realization that Roland had got something over on him as far as his relationship with Susan, Jonas is still kind of playing Roland soft. He's still playing him as if he's not a man, but a boy. He's still... I don't want to say underestimating him, because I think the events of this week show that maybe he just estimated him right. But it is still so interesting to me that, like, even after all this has happened, he's still being like, they're just boys. They're just soft boys.
Yeah, I mean, I think this week's reading is where Jonas's fatal error really becomes highlighted, because it becomes a matter of personal ego for him, that he just can't acknowledge Roland's group as being potentially dangerous. And I think, if anything, this sort of weakness of his becomes worse when Roland later calls him out on being a failed gunslinger.
Yeah.
It's like it's a stab in the heart. And I think what's fascinating about that scene is, like, it's totally a win for Jonas, but he walks away from it feeling like it was a loss.
Yeah.
And I think that's all rooted in the fact that it's just impossible for him to see these young men as anything other than boys.
I wonder if part of that is, like, if it's almost as if the more he learned about Roland, the closer he saw he was to the gunslinger culture and being a gunslinger, the less respect he had for him, because Jonas clearly has this gunslinger shaped chip on his shoulder, and almost can't bring himself to take anyone that would be called a gunslinger seriously, because he just is trying so hard to show how little respect he has for that way of life, because he failed it, because it eluded his grasp. And so that's like a kind of a complex he's developed about gunslingers that forces him to treat this kid as a boy.
Yeah, I like that a lot. That's not something that had occurred to me, but I like this view on his behavior and his thought processes. That's really cool. Yeah. I also like what you just pulled out about him saying, first of all, this acknowledgement that Farson, the good man, is somebody who cares a lot about Ka. I think that's really interesting, because it's like, like all the big players in this world take Ka very seriously. But I think what's interesting to me about this is that Jonas is like, well, maybe it's our Ka, and that reminds me so much actually of Roland's being like Ka must serve my love, basically. The idea that like Ka is going to be on my side. And I think if there is one point to the Dark Tower up to this point, it is that Ka is on no one's side.
Yeah, right.
It just uses people at certain times.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I love that line that it may be our Ka rather than the affiliations. Like, it's just like that. This is for us, not for them. And we do kind of see at the end of this reading that like we can call it Ka, but like everything that our characters have been defined as, Elaine's touch, Roland's senses and instinct fail them entirely when it comes to the moment of the arrest, right? So you could argue that was Ka serving Jonas's side rather than the affiliation side, but you're absolutely right. The thing about this is that it's kind of like, to make a comparison, it's kind of like when Jonas listens to Rhea talk about how Merlin's grapefruit only works for her. It's hers now. It found its owner, and he is kind of like, well, I'm sure you're not the first person who's thought that. And that's kind of the same thing with Ka, right? That it's like, I'm sure you're not the first person that thought Ka was bending to your will, because one fortuitous thing happened to you, and then only to see it bite you in the ass afterwards.
Exactly. I mean, it's a perfect parallel to, like I just said, to where Roland is in this very story, where they're both, or at least until recently, they were both like, Ka has just got to be on my side, which is probably a bad. It's probably like thinking like, well, I'm going to be fine because I'm really lucky. It's like, well, that's not reliable.
Yeah, it's definitely not. Yeah. Oh, it's so fascinating. I just like that one line that it may be our Ka rather than the affiliations, again, kind of like attacks your understanding of what this thing is, what Ka is, and how how everyone treat it. And like, it's interesting that like Latigo does not like push back against that statement. He's probably like, yeah, okay, but he's like, but his thing is more, I still need you to take them seriously. Right. Do you have a plan for them?
Yeah. In this usage, it's almost more similar to luck than it would be to fate, actually. So
sure.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And he, in his kind of anger at him, at Jonas for taking these kids not seriously, he says, "Have you forgotten what Walter O'Dim said to you?" And he's like, I haven't forgotten a word. Cy Walter is an unforgettable sort of man. And then Latigo says, yes, he's the good man's underliner. The chief reason he came to you was to underline these boys. I just like, that's just such, I don't have anything super intellectual to say here other than that's just really wonderful play on words there.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard that usage before, but like it's one of those great things where as soon as you hear it, you're not wondering like, what does he mean by that? You're like, yes, now I'm going to use this word in this context forevermore. Yes. It's perfect.
It is really perfect. I love it. But anyway, pressured by Latigo, Jonas reveals his plans. Sheriff Avery has told Roland and his friends to stay away from the town on Reaping Day. They made up like that there's a custom that they don't want outsiders around during the reap, which is, of course, ridiculous. In fact, it's so ridiculous because it's exact opposite of how this world works, that on these special occasion days, they welcome outsiders more than ever. And they're basically betting on the fact that Roland would sniff it out out right away as fake, as made up. But that was part of the plan too, because then it would make Roland and his group think that they were moving against them on Reap Day itself rather than the day before, which is their real plan. And it's this really clever little like maneuver from Jonas, and I really appreciate it because King has told us over and over again that Jonas is smart, and he's kind of showed us in the micro with his playing of castles. But this is him, like, he's playing like 4D chess here, and it works. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think it is just a legitimately clever, like, not overly complicated, just like the right kind of sort of trap that you can imagine actually working in real life.
Yeah.
If you had to trick someone, right? It's not too twisty and turny. It's just like, it's like a very simple chess trap where you're like, all right, I'm going to make him think I'm doing this. And then when he goes for it, I'm going to pin him. Which is sort of, that is literally what, he thinks in terms of, not chess, but castles metaphors all the time. So
sure.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And what I like about it too is we've kind of seen in Roland in the past, like I'm thinking the moments in the Wastelands when all those traps are being set for him as he chased after Jake and Lud, and like moments where like you're going to get distracted by this trap and not see this other one. And like Roland just is like, no, I sniffed out your trick immediately.
Yeah.
And so like, I think there's an expectation here, especially when you're reading this part, that, oh, surely our gunslingers are going to recognize this obvious play and counteract it and realize, well, they want us to think so badly that it's on the day that it must not be on the actual day. So we should be on guard the days leading up to the Reap. But they don't. We haven't gotten to it yet. I want to really talk about the moment where they announce how obvious the sheriff's plan is. It's really fascinating. But there's this quote here I wanted to talk about. This is kind of Latigo's response to the plan. And he says, "But what I want to know is, are they convinced? Can you take them on the day before reaping as you promised, or will they be waiting?" DePape and Reynolds looked at Jonas. Jonas reached behind him and put his hand on Coral's narrow but not uninteresting thigh. Here it was, he thought. He would be held to what he said next, and without grace. If he was right, the big coffin hunters would be thanked and paid, perhaps bonused as well. If he was wrong, he would likely be hung so hard and high that their heads would pop off when they hit the end of the rope. "We'll take them as easy as birds on the ground," Jonas said. So there's just so much fun stuff to talk about here, Matt. Like just the subtle things that King is doing. There are multiple moments throughout this conversation that Jonas is reaching out to and touching Coral, like as for like emotional support. Like this is a big moment. They basically frame this as a big moment. He's going to commit fully to this plan, and it could, if it goes bad, it could end up in his death. Whether or not he dies at the hand of the gunslingers, he will die at the hands of his bosses. And in that moment, he grabs Coral for like just like an emotional touch. I mean, like you've been in a relationship before, like when you're like about to do something really scary, like you grab your significant other's hand and like touch them, or grab a family member, a loved one, and just like you get that little moment of support, that little moment of touch. Right. That's just like this, like you connecting physically to shore up your strength as you do this thing. And that's what he does with Coral Thorin.
Yeah. I mean, it really is a sign of their Ka-tetness that he's getting his reassurance from her. Yeah, I love that. I also love the we'll take them as easy as birds on the ground. I mean, there's a ton of bird imagery. Yeah. And I guess imagery is the word, but yes, there's just a ton of the birds. There's birds all over this section. The rook skull has been a symbol for the entire, Hambury part of the book. Right. But it goes overboard in this section.
Yeah, King is laying the bird imagery on thick here. He certainly is. Yeah. And I just generally, I like that King takes the time to show Jonas, who is this like despicable asshole character who is against the characters that we love, like has this moment of nervousness and uncertainty, right? Like he has this moment, this extremely human moment where he's like, okay, whatever I say next, this is it. This is the moment. Yeah. I'm truly sticking my neck out here. This is my moment. This is the big moment where whatever I say here I will be judged against it no matter what happens. And it's just this incredibly human moment for this character. And I just find it so fascinating that King takes the time to give us these moments.
For sure. Well, also that it's sort of a cool moment for Jonas. Like we don't like this character for sure, but it's a moment where he's in threat, he's vulnerable, and then you almost think that he's gonna say something like, well, anything could happen.
Right, like hedge. And he doesn't.
Yeah, he doesn't at all. He goes he completely he goes all the way in, right? He's like 100% easy as birds on the ground, no problem, don't worry about it. And like he's basically calling his shot, and the fact that he executes on that correctly, it makes him even more. I mean, it makes him come off as, I don't know what other word to use for this than like cool. Like he comes off well, right? And he's this hated villain of the story. But I think it's an interesting quality of King is that he's able to give even his terrible, monstrous villains these kind of moments where they get to seem good and strong. I think I said something like this last week, like you definitely need to make your villains strong.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it's not scary when you have to fight them. But not only does Jonas come off as strong here, he comes off as like smart and brave also, which is all to the good, narratively speaking. It all just kind of ramps up the level of like, okay, well, Roland's going to have to step up his game to stand toe to toe with this guy.
I totally agree with that. And I think it's so important. Like we've spent so much time building up the gunslingers and Roland specifically as this like incredible badass, just like wiped out an entire town of people casually. Like he's basically solved every problem he's come up against. And I know this is a younger version of him, but I really do think it's important that we see that like just because you're a gunslinger does not mean that there aren't threats that you can't face in this world. And Jonas not being, I think it'd be very interesting or very easy to make Jonas kind of like a bumbling hench person, right? Like that, just like he's just like kind of like, I think that's more what DePape and Reynolds serve as kind of like the Bebop and Rocksteady of this group, where they're just basically the muscle. We don't need them to think. They don't have to reason. But Jonas is clever and smart, and I just love. He's, I think on this read, probably one of my favorite characters in this book because he's just so fascinating.
Yeah, exactly. I think the fact that a lot of the time he'll make a mistake and then we'll see him correct that mistake rather than just sort of, like you said, being sort of the dumb henchman character who keeps making the same mistake. Yeah,
and I do think, as you said earlier, his refusal to see Roland as anything but a boy does seem like it's being set up to be his flaw. And I love that flaw is a believable one without taking away any of his competence and fierceness in the story. Like, I think it's probably difficult to do sometimes. You want to expose your antagonist's flaw without also making them a non-threat. And I think King has really threaded that needle with Jonas.
I agree.
Cool. So we cut from one more thing. They're gonna frame Roland for the murder of Mayor Thorne and Reimer as well. So that's fun.
Yeah, so they just go ahead and reveal that, right? So, which I think, I just want to take a moment because I really do think this is a fascinating storytelling technique that King employs here. He employs it often, right? So in storytelling, we always want to be surprised, but we want to be surprised in like that specific magical way that still fits within the bounds of our expectations. A UFO showing up in Act 3 of a rom-com is a bad sort of surprise, etc. But it, like in the course of the Hambry flashback portion of the Dark Tower, King has basically gotten us used to the idea that Roland's teenage Ka-tet are these formidable, clever, should never be underestimated. They're in some sense protected by Ka. They're the destined warriors, and we've watched them, win over and over again in situations where they sort of shouldn't have. And ultimately, I think it's a wonderfully satisfying twist almost when they actually do get tricked so thoroughly by Jonas's plan.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I totally agree. And I love that, like, it's almost as if like we are allowed to see that, right? I think you're absolutely right that like the fact that he doesn't, like, we're allowed to see the full scope of Jonas's plan against the I mean, the only thing we don't see until it happens is that they're going to use the rook skull, right? That's really the only surprise in this moment is how they're going to pin the murders on the Ka-tet.
Right.
But I do like King is, we've talked about this so many times, but King is so uninterested in like the kind of spoilery type right out of left field surprise. Like he just telegraphs it. He just like wants you to know immediately. Yeah. Well, this is their plan. Yeah. This is what they're going to do. We, the reader, know all about it. And as we've talked about in the past, it does help create a different kind of tension, not the, I don't know what's going to happen next tension, but the, I know exactly what's going to happen next and I'm watching it happen and there's nothing I can do kind of tension.
It's really been fun because for a long time, I thought that George R. R. Martin was like the perfect storyteller, and I still think he's great. But he uses basically like this one mode of like he sets up one really obvious thing that's supposed to happen, and then you're like, well, that's not going to happen. And then he sets up like a second thing where you're like, you feel clever because you're like, oh, I figured out what's going to happen. But then the thing that actually happens is like a third thing that you never saw coming, but makes sense in retrospect. And like, this is the way he does everything. Mm-hmm. This is his pattern. Yeah. And I thought like, okay, that's how you do storytelling. You set up this complicated, convoluting, winding series of possibilities, and then you always got to hit them out of left field in a way where they're shocked, but in retrospect, it made sense. And it's really been fun for me to read Stephen King, at least in this book. I don't know if he uses different techniques in other books, but in this book, in this series in particular, he really keeps using this technique of like, yeah, this is what's going to happen. That's it. It's not, I'm not going to pull a twist on you. Right. This is actually what's going to happen. And then it still works so well. Mm-hmm. It works so well every single time. Yeah. It really has changed. I mean, this project has literally like changed one of my, beliefs about how to go about storytelling, honestly. Yeah. I mean, I think it's great. We gotta, after we finish Stephen King, we gotta do A Song of Ice and Fire, because I do think these are two, I don't want to say fundamentally different ways of telling stories. They're very different. The way in which information is doled out is between those two authors. They have different ways of doing it. And I think they are both successful at what they do. But it's so funny that they are both successful and yet very different from each other. They work differently. You react to them differently. It's fascinating. That's like part of what I love about studying stories, just like, how does this work? And I think, we're halfway through past halfway through book 4, and we've just seen, just in our short time with King, this is his way. This is how he molds a story, and it works constantly. I've never yet in this story found any of the we'll call them twists, the turns of the story to be unsatisfying. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel the same. Cool. All right, so we cut from Jonas's meeting to Roland's. We cut over from one meeting, one planned meeting, to another planned meeting. But before we do that, King pauses the narrative to tell us this story, Matt. This classic young story of young lovers. The girl, although young, was married. The boy, although fair, was unstable. She met him one night in a remote place to tell him that their affair, sweet as it had been, must end. He replied that it would never end. It was written in the stars. She told him that might be, but at some point the constellations had changed. Perhaps he began to weep. Perhaps she laughed, out of nervousness, very likely. Whatever the cause, such laughter was disastrously timed. He picked up a stone and dashed out her brains with it. Then, coming to his senses and realizing what he had done, he sat down with his back against the granite slab, drew her poor battered head into his lap, and cut his own throat as an owl looked on from a nearby tree. He died covering her face with kisses, and when they were found, their lips were sealed together with his life's blood and with hers. So this is basically, King tells the story and then says every town in this world has a story exactly like this. In Hambreys, it was this person with this person, and here was a location. And then he says, and this location where this thing happened is where Roland and Susan will be having their meeting with their Ka-tet, which is, it's a lot. It's a lot. Yeah. Uh-huh. A lot going on here, Scott. So, first of all, I love, it written in the stars, but the constellations had changed. Mm-hmm. That's got to be the best way of saying star-crossed lovers without actually saying star-crossed lovers. I mean, star-crossed is is a reference to constellations. But anyway, it's a Romeo and Juliet reference. This whole thing is a Romeo and Juliet, except with like a horrible horror edge to it, because Romeo didn't murder Juliet with a rock.
No, he did not.
But also at the same time, it's like, so like I wonder if King did a bunch of research on like folk tales or something, because I know there's like a whole genre of like doomed lovers stories in the world, and like romantic love has been treated as sort of this dangerous and ignoble thing in historical societies where you're supposed to put love second behind duty and so forth. It's just it is interesting, like, why is this here, right? Like why did he, you know what I mean? Why is this here? Because it's just a rock. There's just a rock they're meeting at. So he's taking this opportunity to be like, here, I'm going to remind you of all these things. I'm going to remind you maybe subconsciously of Romeo and Juliet and star-crossed lovers and people who are doomed to die due to their pursuit of their passions. I mean, I guess that's why, fundamentally, is it's connecting those stories to this event that's happening right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the story of doomed lovers. That's what we are being told right now. It's a story of Susan and Roland, the doomed lovers. But to your point, this is a violent story. Like, he was unstable and he lashed out and killed this person. And yeah, it's like it is a very specific twist on the doomed lovers kind of folk story to say that everywhere in this world, every small town in this world has a story like this where a man brutally murders the woman he loves. And look, not to spoil our future Buffy podcast, but there's an episode of Buffy where this exact thing does happen, kind of, and it's a whole episode about these doomed lovers and what happens there. I think it is so fascinating, like that you would take this, like the two lovers that just couldn't make it work story, and like in Midworld, it is a violent bent to it, right? And it is a violence against woman bent to it, which seems to be just prevalent in this world. Like, this is just what this world is, and as we've said many times, we know the ending of the story. We know the end of the story ends with Susan dying. We know that, and so this is exactly how this is going to go, that she is going to die. We don't know how. Like, we have a kind of a good idea. This is one of those moments where I don't exactly remember how much so I'm afraid to say too much.
I think we know that she's burned to death.
Okay.
Beyond that, I'm not 100% sure.
Sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I do think it is one of those things where King just goes on a tangent because he loves to like build these worlds. And like, I think it helps build Hambry as this, like, a place that you understand when they have their folk legend of the doomed lovers involves a man bashing a woman's head in with a rock and then realizing his mistake only too late, taking his own life. And then their lovers kiss, which again is like, she's already dead when he kisses her. So like, like they were found, their lips were sealed together with his life's blood and with hers, and she's probably like, I didn't want that.
Yeah.
I specifically wanted to end this thing.
Right. Yeah. That is funny, because it's like, it's the opposite. Well, not the opposite, but it, like, in contrast to Romeo and Juliet, of Juliet getting the poison off of Romeo's lips, intentionally kissing him to seal her death.
Yeah.
That happened, right?
Well, she tries. She can't. She
tries to. Okay.
Juliet kills herself with a dagger.
With a knife. Yeah.
She tries to kiss him to get the poison off his lips, but it's not there. Of course, he's already dead. I don't know if you've ever seen the one Romeo and Juliet, the Baz Luhrmann 90s remake with DiCaprio.
I've never seen it all the way through. The
one thing that movie does that I think is, well, I love that movie. It's so fucking 90s and I love it. But the one cool thing that it does, I think, that I don't think is in the original play. It's been a while since I read Romeo and Juliet, but I'm pretty sure in the original play, Romeo dies, then Juliet wakes up, sees he's dead, and then kills herself. In the Baz Luhrmann movie, Romeo drinks the poison, and a second after he drinks the poison, she touches his arm. And so he like has to die knowing that she's not dead. And it's just like just turning the cruelty of the moment up just a little bit, where he has a moment of realization that was like, oh, she wasn't really dead. Fuck, I've already drank. Oh, I'm dead.
Oh, that's awesome. I didn't see that part. So that really is twisting the knife.
Yeah,
that's great.
It is. That's a total digression. Sorry about that. But yeah, I mean, I do think this is like, we talked about at the very beginning of the book that he put this Romeo and Juliet quote in here, and it has become more and more obvious why he's done this as we've gone through the story. And this is his own kind of mid-world Romeo and Juliet. And of course it serves to build the world and build the town. But of course, yes, as you talked about, it serves because it directly relates to Roland and Susan. Like the girl, although young, she's not married, but she was promised to something else. And you could argue that Roland's a little unstable in certain ways. You could make that argument.
Yeah. I'd say so.
So yeah, it just fills this with this ominous nature. They're meeting in a graveyard, and not only is it a graveyard, but it's a graveyard in which lovers just like themselves lost their life or took their lives.
Right. I mean, there's tons of omens. Ominous. There's omens throughout this entire section.
Yeah.
Bad omens specifically.
Very bad. Yeah. So Susan's aunt is getting increasingly more suspicious of her activities. So sneaking out of the house to meet with the Ka-tet almost becomes impossible for Susan. I really love these moments where we see Cord kind of become more and more unhinged as the 1-2 punch of both Susan and her activities and the rumors about Jonas shacking up with Coral Thorin, like just ruin her life. It's just really wonderful. And it kind of culminates at the end of this week's reading in her making a stuffy gal and burning it, like this crazy moment that I think is just so wonderful.
Yeah.
But we've kind of seen Coral waste away throughout the course of the story.
Yeah.
Not Coral, sorry, Cord.
Cord, right. Yeah, I mean, it's been like 15 years since I read Needful Things, but Cord's degeneration reminds me very much of the sorts of things that book is about thematically. So basically, King has taken this deeply unhappy person who was really lacking already in any kind of substantial self-awareness. But however, there was nothing really overtly wrong with Cord. He's just kind of a small, petty, unhappy person. Mm-hmm. And then just kind of piling it on, just in rapid succession, the series of betrayals and failures and losses and unmet hopes, just to see how tight can you turn the screws before this person breaks.
Yeah. I
think this is it's funny. Like I sometimes say stuff like, oh, this is a very Stephen King thing. And it's like, come on, Matt, you haven't read anything he's written. But like, this strikes me as a very Stephen King thing to take this sort of normal character and just pile it on them until they break.
Yeah.
And examine that process.
You're totally right, and I having just reread Needful Things a couple months ago. I mean, that is exactly what's happening with Cord. It's just these moments of just like, you give people just a little push. I mean, that's Needful Things is a man moves into a town and he sells them things and he has them do just little pranks on each other. Just like, I know about you, or just like put a phone number with a lipstick stain in the car of someone and his girlfriend finds it, and it's just these little tiny things that push a peaceful, happy town to destroying each other, and that is exactly what's happening with Cord here. And I talked about this later in the notes, but I think this feels like a better time to talk about it. The ways in which Cord's degeneration and Rhea's degeneration kind of parallel but also contrast each other, because Rhea is also a character that is wasting away throughout the course of the story, but her wasting away is very supernaturally tied. It's tied to Merlin's grapefruit, which, thank God I can say that now, because I've almost said that phrase like 30 times so far, and I've always gone back to the glass.
Yeah, the Palantir.
But yeah, Cord's is not related to that supernatural thing. It is a very mundane kind of collapse of degeneration.
Yeah, I think I want to talk about Rhea specifically when we get there.
Sure.
I'll wait for now.
There's just one small thing I want to talk about here, where Susan is sneaking out of the mayor's house. She's staying at the mayor's house until the Reap. That's how she got out of having to live with her aunt and being able to sneak away. And she gets out of there. And the text says she'd gone over the balcony, moving nimbly down the 15 feet of tangled vines growing up the north side of the building and through the rear servant's door in the wall. There, Roland had been waiting, and after 2 warm minutes, which we need not concern ourselves, they rode double on Rusher to the graveyard. I love the 2 warm minutes with which we need not concern ourselves. Like, so much of the first half of the story has been a love story, right? It has been the slow but inevitable connecting of Roland and Susan and their love blossoming. And King took a lot of very slow, pained, arduous moments of them like resisting each other and then finally coming together. And then he describes it in very explicit detail the first time they came together, and now we've moved on from that part of the story, right? We're now the Roland and Susan love story, which is still all through this, is secondary to what's happening in Hambry right now. And so the text reflects that in the storytelling, which is just like, we don't need to worry about, like, they just you know what they're gonna do.
Right. True love is boring.
Yeah, exactly.
It's perfect.
Yeah.
I did like that, right? It would have felt weird and out of place at this point if we had another lengthy interlude of whatever it is they got up to. But no, just it's not important. It's not important to the story.
Well, and I, like, you're right that having a long, lengthy, like, and then they made out and banged for a couple minutes. Well, I don't think they banged. It's probably just
I mean, it's possible. Maybe they've gotten really efficient. But
they could. But I think you could have just not had anything there, right? You could have just not pointed towards that. But I think King taking the time to say after 2 more minutes, we need not concern ourselves, is not only correctly stating that true love is boring, but drawing our attention to that fact again, saying like notice, like, this is not what the story is about anymore.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
So they arrive at the meeting place, which is the graveyard, and Susan truly meets Elaine Johns and Cuthbert Allgood for the first time. The thing that I really want to point out as we go through this meeting is that it structurally matches the meeting with Jonas, like, to a T. First, we have the 2 henchmen deal with the presence of the woman that has joined their group, which is exactly what Reynolds and DePape did when they saw that Coral Thorn was there. Then they catch everyone up on the status of their actions so far. Then eventually the conversation switches over to their enemies and how they think they're going to deal with them. And lastly, we wrap up the conversation by turning over to the problem of Rhea and her pink orb. They are the same. These 2 meetings are exactly the same.
Yeah. I mean, structurally they're the same, but like we mentioned earlier, they're different in terms of how each character responds to the situation, which I think just is that's why he made them structurally the same, so that you could draw these parallels and these inversions. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think when you make things parallel, it makes the contrast stand out a little bit better, right? When 2 people look almost the same, the one difference in them stands out more. And that's kind of what he's doing here is seeing how they're both working against each other and doing so in similar ways, but the ways in which they're doing that stand out a little more, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So the first thing that happens is Susan apologizes to both Cuthbert and Elaine and says that she really hopes that they don't hate her. And then this happens. For a terrible moment, Cuthbert was silent, looking over Susan's shoulder, seeming to study the waxing demon moon. She felt her heart stop. Then his gaze returned to her and he gave a smile of such sweetness that a confused but brilliant thought, if I'd met this one first, it began, shot through her mind like a comet. Holy shit. Holy shit.
I love this so much.
Isn't it so wonderful?
It's so funny. I mean, it's so good, right? Mm-hmm. It's just so realistic. Extremely, extremely realistic and honest. I think this book has consistently portrayed young love in this unvarnished way, showing us what a crazy, silly thing it really is, and all these statements of eternal devotion and love. And Susan is still able to admit to herself in her private thoughts, like, oh, this guy's pretty hot, you know? Maybe I could have just as easily fallen in love with this guy if I'd seen him first.
Oh my God, all the star-crossed lover stuff, and like you and I were destined, and then if I had met this one first, shot through her mind. Yeah, kids.
Yeah. I've mentioned, I've told you Matt's first law, right? Probably at some point in our friendship.
I'm sure. Yeah.
It's a law. It's an iron law of human sociology and anthropology that I developed when I was in high school. That the law is just that within any group of teenagers, romantic attraction will exist between every possible pairing. I discovered this when my stupid friends in high school made a chart of who had dated or who had admitted to having had a crush on whom within our group of friends, and the image that resulted was a spider web of just every person having lines between them. Anyway, that's just the truth about humans, is my point, is that nothing special about your cosmic fated young love is kind of what the story is saying, I think.
Yeah. It's such a small moment, but I think you're absolutely right. Yeah.
I also want to talk about the fact that Roland is telling the story once again, and you know, we've suggested, I think last week we said, like, maybe there's some sort of telepathic insight into the truth of things that's allowing him to tell the story when it comes to things that he can't have possibly known the truth of.
Yeah.
And this definitely feels like one of those moments, because it's just, you know, this is what Susan is thinking in this moment, obviously. Sure. And I think it's really interesting, though, how the narrator of the story, Roland, kind of shies away from fully articulating Susan's thought. Like, he kind of half says it. If I'd met this one first, it began. But he can't fully bear to say it out loud. Like, maybe even old grown-up Roland is kind of a bit disturbed to acknowledge that this love for which he spent his whole life pining wasn't quite this perfect, you know, once in a billion thing that he imagined. Sure.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great way of looking at it, and I totally agree. I think it is a thought. Like, I love that the text describes it as a confused but brilliant thought that shoots through her mind like a comet. Like, she has no control over it, but it's just there. And I think he is kind of shying away from it. And, you know, I think when you said this love that he's been pining for his entire life, I think that's totally right. And I think it's one of those things. It's like Firefly. Like, hear me out. The show? Yes, the show.
Okay.
The reason people love Firefly is because Firefly was canceled. And look, I think Firefly is a really great show. I really like it. If Firefly went on for 6-7 seasons, I don't think it would be as revered and loved as it is today. I think people love Firefly because Firefly was canceled. Roland loves and pines after Susan for his entire life because Susan was canceled.
Oh, okay. I love this. I mean, yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, pining only works for someone who's not there. Mm-hmm. If they had a relationship that continued on, they would have exited the honeymoon phase, and it would no longer look this way, you know. But I mean, I think it is interesting that I really do think that we don't actually know how old Roland is, but like, however old Roland is, I do think he has had this like sort of preciousness about his memories of Susan, where he's clearly still traumatized by this event, even as an older man. It's not something that he has been able to put down, and maybe I think the telling of this story is actually him processing this event, possibly literally for the first time processing this event.
Yeah.
So, which I think will be part of his growth as a character. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked about how much of this is for the others to learn about Roland's past, and how much of it is for Roland to really face his past for the first time. And again, it seems like it's more the latter than the former.
Yeah, I think so.
Great. Love it. Cool. So then Roland, after they do this, Roland declares they formally declares them Ka-tet in a scene that kind of mirrors the first time he says this to his Ka-tet in the present. And as they sit on the mausoleum floor, King notes that the floor is scattered with the petals of dead roses. So that's not at all a thing.
Yeah, dead roses, you know, right? So it's our symbol. It's our important symbol, right? The symbol of things we need to protect but it's the dead remnants of it. So, I mean, again, more omens, right? I do think it's interesting to ask why King has injected all these moments of foreshadowing into the story when we've known from the beginning that Susan was going to die. Like, we already know she's going to die. Why do we need all the omens? Why do we need? and the thing is, I thought about this because I was like, why did he do this? And I think it comes down to two things for me. And maybe you can think of some other things, but the two things are tone and expectations. So in terms of tone, King needs to keep this steady tonal sense that we're in a tragedy. And I think that this sense of impending doom and tragedy would actually lapse if the text became lighter and freer and absent of these moments of doom. And then expectations wise, he's often setting up just like very specific near-term subconscious expectations. So we know that Susan's going to be burned alive. I'm pretty sure that was revealed to us, like in maybe even literally in the Gunslinger. And then so far we've had many beats of like burning, preparing fires, burning brush, burning stuffy guys, lots of burning imagery, right? So yeah. he's priming us for certain specific. It's not just like, oh, it's ominous. Like some of it is, but some of it is specifically like this is the actual. We're building toward the actual bad thing that's going to happen.
Yeah. I think that's spot on. I agree with you. I also will say that just like the thing about foreshadowing is when you do it really well, it almost doesn't seem like foreshadowing to a reader until you get to what's been foreshadowed.
Sure.
But when you get to do it like this, where you know already what's going to happen at the end, then the foreshadowing is made evident to the reader in a way that it isn't normally. So us, the reader, pick up on every one of these moments, and we get to have these moments of, yeah, and that's just fun. It's fun to read that way. It's fun to be able, like, you know, you and I, when we do these close readings, even if we didn't know what was happening in the next week's chapter, like you don't, you still notice foreshadowing because you are reading the text very closely. Most people that read these stories are not reading the text like we are, and they are not going to notice these things, the things that are being laid down, the seeds that are being planted. You might notice them subconsciously, but you don't consciously notice them. But when you do it like this, you kind of getting to reward your reader and with a little dopamine hit, because it's like, I recognize that one. I know what you're doing with that, and that's just enjoyable and entertaining.
Yeah, I agree. It's that's a great point, because I think, you know, in most books you would catch these moments of foreshadowing on a reread, right? You'd be like, oh yeah, that was he's but in this book you don't even need to wait for the reread. And that might be one of the charms of the series, actually, is that it probably works pretty similarly on the first read as the second, because of the fact that he's told you so many of the things that are going to happen. Obviously, he hasn't told us everything. Like there have been a bunch of awesome moments that I didn't anticipate. But a lot of the moments you do anticipate, and that lets you have that sort of, it's almost a semi, like, this is the second time I've seen this way of processing it. That's cool.
I still think this is definitely a series that rewards multiple reads, but I do think it is unique in some ways that the first read in the foreshadowing ways like this is unique. It's fun. It's fun.
Yep.
So Roland then kind of summarizes our plot so far. Farson means to attack the affiliation using the oil from Sitgo, most likely refined along the way in a place he calls V Castus, to power giant war machines from the old people to wipe out the entirety of the affiliation. If he's successful, Farson will win, and everyone and everything he knows will die. And Roland means to deny them of this. He's going to deny them of the oil. And so that's his plan. Well, that's at least the goal of what he wants to do. He's going to make sure that they don't get any of this oil. So then the Ka-tet talks about how it's extremely obvious that the bad guys mean to move on Reaping Day. Like, we were talking about this earlier, Matt. Like, Cuthbert can't even say it, because it's so fucking hilarious how obvious it is, right? It's like he can't help but laugh. He can't he has to say, you tell him, because it's so obvious that this is a trick. It's so obvious that they mean to move on this day because they're trying to, like, they're wanting to make it seem like it's not, like, it's so obvious. But of course they're wrong. they're 100% wrong here. Right.
They've fallen for like the lowest level of chess gambit you can possibly fall for. Yes. Mm-hmm. It's basically a scholar's mate.
Oh, you nerd. What a nerd. He says on episode 26 of his podcast.
Yes, well.
No, I think like that's just King having fun. Like that he really, it's not just that we get to see that Roland has taken the bait entirely. It's that they are so convinced that they are right that they're kind of joking about it. That just really helps seal the irony of the situation.
Yeah, it brings it to the point where you're just sort of rolling your eyes at them, actually. Like, these are your heroes, and you're like, God damn it, guys. Like it's not even, there's not even suspense about it. You're like, oh shit, they're just going to get caught. Like, this is not even, there's not even they're not ready. And right.
And I still think there's a part of you when you're reading this moment that, especially even when Cuthbert starts laughing, that they're going to be like, well, it's so obvious that they were trying to fake us out about this that it can't be this day. You know, it's like the Princess Bride. It's like, did you know that I knew?
Yeah.
Like,
right.
You would have known that I did this, so it can't possibly on this day, right? Like, right. I was, even on this reread, I've read this book many times, even on this reread was like, they're about to sniff out how they know the plan. And then it's not that.
Right.
It's that it worked perfectly on them. And you're just like, oh, God.
Yeah. Yeah. I take back what I said about there not being suspense because actually there was. Actually, you're like, oh, well, they haven't seen it coming yet. So how are they going to get out of the situation when they don't seem to get that they're being tricked? and like I said earlier, like, the fun twist is that they don't, because you're so used to them getting out of everything through their guile and their perceptiveness that just being fucking idiots is actually the hilarious and actually very effective twist that the story pulls on you.
Yeah, definitely. It's so great.
Yeah.
So Roland then outlines his plan. He's going to set fire to the oil and then draw all of Farson's men into this thinny and then escape out of that little cut in the canyon wall. And this is what I love, Matt, because when he says he's going to draw them into the thinny, we hear, then, not without respect, Susan says, "You're mad." "No," Cuthbert said thoughtfully, "he's not. You're thinking about that little cut in the canyon wall, aren't you, Roland? The one just before the jog into the canyon floor." And what I love about this, Matt, is that as far as we know, Roland and Cuthbert have never had a conversation about the little cut in the canyon wall. Yeah. Like, we saw, the only thing we've seen this before is Roland clocked it. He's looking into the thinny, he's looking into the canyon, and he clocks this thing, and he says, and the text is just like, because he just can't help it. He just can't help see things like this. And so what we're kind of forced to conclude here is that Cuthbert did the same thing. They walked into the box canyon, and he clocked this thing just because he's so used to it and didn't think anything else of it. And then they just kind of silently both notice this thing. It's just like, it's gunslingers, man. And I know Cuthbert is not a gunslinger yet, but he's a gunslinger in training.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. Gunslingers, man. It was a great moment, right?
It really was.
Because at the time you're like, oh, Roland's so cool because he notices, and it's like Cuthbert not only noticed it, but he's like, yeah, you noticed it too, of course. Mm-hmm. Of course we all noticed it. Elaine, you noticed it, right? Yes, of course.
Yeah, really great. So Susan will also have a role to play in this whole thing, though we don't quite see what it is yet. But we also are told here that Shimi will be involved as well. The text here says, Cuthbert was reluctant to involve Shimi, but finally went along. The boy's part would be minimal, if not exactly low risk, and Roland agreed that they could take him with them when they left Mages for good. A party of 5 was as fine as a party of 4, he said. So again, King's having fun with us because we've now got our party of 5, right? Roland's Ka-tet is complete, and it is complete in a way that matches the Ka-tet of the present day, right? We have, Roland, we have Cuthbert being our kind of Eddie. You could make an argument that Elaine is kind of our Jake. You could make an argument that Susan is our Susanna. I mean, their names are similar. And you could say that Shimi is kind of our Oi. Although I don't want to say that to be disrespectful of Shimi, but I think that's what the book is kind of trying to draw comparisons there. He's not fiercely like bonded to Elaine. He's fiercely bonded to Cuthbert, so it's not exactly the same. Like I think these parallels are here, but they don't have to structurally like line up perfectly, right? That's not required.
Right. I think just the fact that he's sort of a lesser member in the sense that like he's not going to be expected to be like an important, cog in the combat machine, for example. Mm-hmm. I get it. I mean, I see even less well how Rhea matches up with Oi, but I mean, I guess, I don't know. Can't really make it work that well, honestly. But now that they're all together, now that the Ka-tet is together, they're all going to be fine and they're going to win the day because that's how this works.
Indeed.
We haven't really talked about this yet, but it's actually pretty unusual to have two major female characters in your book have such similar names, Susan and Susanna. Mm-hmm. And then not only that, but to parallel them to this degree, like obviously there's parallels being drawn between the two in a number of ways. I just don't understand why yet. Like there's so many names King could have chosen, mm-hmm. but he chose Susan and Susanna. And I'm not sure that I am at the point of the story of understanding why he made this choice.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think I'm trying to think of the correct thing to say here. Yeah, I definitely think we're supposed to. I mean, I think one of the things that Susanna says to Roland as he's preparing to tell the story is, tell me about the woman who is my namesake, or something like that, right? Yeah. The story is asking you in every way to make this parallel.
Right.
And I don't think it has revealed. I mean, like, we've spent a lot of time on the Eddie Cuthbert parallel, right? That is sure. The book has made that very textual. All of the other ones really have not been as textual. Really, the only Jake Elaine thing that I can get is that both of them are very sensitive in the touch or the shining or whatever we want to call it. This extra sensory perception that they have. That's really it.
Yeah. I mean, Jake's a kid. Totally. I mean, everything about him is different, right? Mm-hmm. And I don't see all that many direct comparisons between Susan and Susanna, honestly.
They're women that have similar names.
Yeah. But and that's why I'm like, then why are they, mm-hmm. then why did they have similar names? Again, maybe I'm making a lot out of nothing, but like you just said, King did point this out to us, mm-hmm. So I don't know. I this is one of those things where I'm bringing it up because I don't know what to make of it, and I feel like it's going to go somewhere, and I'm not sure where yet.
Yeah. I will say that not only this occurred to me as I was speaking, that Elaine and Jake also are reverential to Roland in a similar kind of way. Sure. Their relationship with Roland is different from Eddie / Cuthbert's relationship with Roland. So.
Yeah, I like that.
So that's another kind of, but yeah, I agree with you on Susan and Susanna. There's not, we haven't really seen a lot there. And even like personality wise, like we know a lot about Susan at this point, and I don't see any Susanna in her really.
Yeah.
All right. So the Ka-tet is about to end their palaver, but before they do, there's one thing they have to talk about still. Rhea. How could she have possibly known about Roland and Susan? How? And so Roland hypnotizes Susan, and she again talks about everything going pink. But this time, Cuthbert and Elaine react to that word shocked. It can't be, can it? And then we have this great line as we move into a flashback. His father in the yard behind the great hall. It's the grapefruit, by which I mean the pink one. The pink one.
Yeah.
So here we go, Matt. We flash back again, and so now we're a story within a story within a story to Roland, Cuthbert, and Elaine in the moments before they left for Magus. Stephen Deshane starts talking about something called the Wizard's Rainbow, or Merlin's Rainbow, or Marilyn's Rainbow, as it's spelled and pronounced in this story. But not all of the old stories are true. But I think that Marilyn's Rainbow is. Stephen replied. It's said that there once was 13 glass balls in it, one for each of the 12 guardians, and one representing the nexus point of the beams. One for the tower, Roland said in a low voice, feeling goose flesh. One for the dark tower. Aye, 13 it was called when I was a boy. We'd tell stories about the black ball around the fire sometimes and scare ourselves silly, unless our fathers caught us at it. My own dad said it wasn't wise to talk about 13, for it might hear its name called and roll your way. But black 13 doesn't matter, you three. To you three. Not now, at least. No, it's the pink one. Merlin's grapefruit. And so we see here that the most of the rainbow is broken, but there are some that still do exist, four at least. Some colors of the wizard's rainbow are reputed to look into the future. Others look into the other worlds, those where the demons live, those where the old people are supposed to have gone when they left our world. These may also show the location of secret doors which pass between the worlds. Other colors, they say, can look far into our own world and see things people would as soon keep secret. They never see the good, only the ill. How much of this is true and how much is a myth, no one knows for sure. So this is just a whole lot of world building, Matt. So talk to me about Maryland's rainbow.
It's a dang old bunch of world building right there. I mean, Stephen knows about doors to other worlds. That's cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we have this suggestion that they believe the great old ones departed midworld for another world.
Yeah, that's kind of new, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I don't remember what we thought happened to the great old ones. I guess maybe I assumed they died, but yeah, they could have just left. Like maybe they went to Earth. Maybe that's why we have technology on our Earth, is that all the great old ones left this world and went to ours. Just a thought. Yeah, no, it's good stuff delivered about as casually and compactly as you would expect in this series that plays so close to the chest with its world building.
Sure.
I do expect that we'll come across this black orb at some point.
Yeah, so. the black 13. Ooh,
yeah, that's so good. Yeah,
I love, like, even this is before Roland really gives a shit about the tower at all. But even in this moment, one for the tower, one for the dark tower. Yeah. He says as he feels goose flesh. It's like it's his Ka. The tower is his Ka, even before he knew it.
Yeah, he feels the pull of it even before he really understands why.
I think one of the things King does very cleverly in all this exposition and world building here is we know the truth of some of this, or like Stephen goes through and says some look into the future, some look into the world that demons live, some look into the world where the old people have gone, and then he says others, they can say, look far into our own world and see things people would as soon keep secret. They never see the good, only the ill. Now that's important because we know that that's what the grapefruit does. And what that does is subtly reinforce everything that came before it, right? He has this line, how much of this is true and how much is myth, no one knows for sure. But the text has just told us that something he was unsure whether it was true or a myth is factually accurate. We know that this is how one of them works. And it kind of makes the other stuff he says more believable as well. It kind of makes us read that, oh yeah, one of these looked into other worlds. One of them was able to see the passageways between worlds. And so we can make the assumption that that is exactly how the other glass balls work, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's very clever.
It is. And the way he set it up, it just inclines me to be like, all right, yep, these are the other balls. Maybe we'll see these other balls. They'll do these specific things that we've already been told, and I'm good. I gotcha.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I mean, it's interesting because this is almost like a MacGuffin in the most classical sense of the word, right? Where this is really kind of just tangentially related to our plot so far. It is this powerful object that has been in our story from the very beginning of it, but it has only kind of just on the side poked its way into the plot. And we still don't know really what to make of it other than it's a thing. It's connecting us to the Arthurian legend again through Merlin. It's bad, though. They're told that these things have personalities of their own. If you hold it for too long, it corrupts you, and we see that's exactly what's happening with Rhea. That's why it was over here in the first place, because Farson can't be around it for too long, or it starts to hurt him. But we still don't know that, like, okay, so where are we supposed to file this information away, right? What do we do with this other than this is a bad thing, and it's probably bad if our bad guys have it?
Yeah, I mean, I actually have some, I don't know if predictions is the right word, but like,
I love these.
But like the word, like a bad thing that could happen to our heroes is for them to come into possession of these things because they're so dangerous. Like they're powerful. Like this is going to be later in the notes, but like one thing that the orb is definitely is definitely related to is the One Ring, right? It's a Palantir in function, but it's the One Ring in how it affects the person who uses it.
Sure.
It wears at them and it makes them addicted to using it, and it kind of turns Rhea into Gollum in the course of a few months, I guess. And so that's dangerous. It's dangerous to have these things in the story where they're so powerful that they're the kinds of things that Roland would want to use on his quest, but they kind of destroy you. So I was thinking maybe like our characters do find these things and it's bad for them. That's and then of course we then play into all these addiction metaphors that we've set up in the story. That's the sort of connection that I was thinking might happen. But we'll see.
Cool. I cannot comment on any of that, but I
very
like it.
well.
So one more thing happens as we're leaving this flashback, and I love this. So Stephen says to them, "I don't expect you boys to see Marilyn's glass, but I didn't expect to be seeing you off at 14 with revolvers tucked into your belts either. Ka's at work here, and where Ka works, anything is possible." Slowly, Stephen took off his hat, stepped back, and swept them a bow. "Go in peace, boys, and return in health." "Long days and pleasant nights, Si," Elaine said. "Good fortune," Cuthbert said. "I love you," Roland said. Stephen nodded. "Thank you, Si. I love you too." I love that detail here. Matt, I love how he says, "I love you." Like, I think it's like we build up this kind of warrior culture here, like this honor culture. And I think like in hyper masculine honor culture, that kind of display of affection towards your father I would assume is something that is like looked down upon. And yet he's just so open with just, "I love you. I love you."
Yeah, it's a great scene. It's heartbreaking. I'd really love this particular flashback. I think it is important that we see these little moments of humanity with Roland's, mom and dad, even if they aren't necessarily happy moments. They're human moments.
Yeah, that's right. Because I think there is that moment where he's leaving town and he looks behind him and his mother is in a window looking down at him from a window weeping, and she sends him a wave and he does not wave back because he's still so angry with her. And like this is, to link something back, like the moment that stuck in his head so much in his past was this moment that he saw Susan in the window, the girl in the window, right? And he's kind of made this connection. Now this king has made this connection with the two women in his life looking at him down from a window. He raised a hand to wave to the one that he loved and he ignored the other. It's just a really powerful connection. Yeah.
I love that.
So back in the present, or the young, you know what I mean? Young Roland's present. Elaine takes over the hypnotism that Roland was doing because he's got the touch and he's just better at it. And Susan is finally able to remember what Rhea said to her. But more importantly, she remembers the time when she went and got wood, turned the wrong direction, and saw Rhea's secret hiding place for the grapefruit. So now the Tet knows that she has it. And I think this is kind of where you jump in with your why you think they're going to get it.
Yeah, I mean, I think once that now that they know that the enemy has this powerful weapon, they're gonna make it an objective to either steal or destroy the grapefruit. It's a weapon of the enemy. You want to deny them the weapon. So, I think I wouldn't be surprised if we at the very least got that Pippin grabs the Palantir scene where one of the Ka-tet picks up the orb for just a second, and then they're showing these terrible, terrible things they'd rather not see that motivate the plot in some direction because, oh my God, we didn't know about this thing. And then if this does happen, I'm going to guess that it's Elaine because he's the one with the shinin. And that would just make sense to me.
Have we ever said where the shinin comes from? Yeah, it's the Simpsons, folks. It's the Simpsons.
It's the Simpsons. You can't call it The Shining. You want to get sued?
Don't you mean The Shining? Shut up, boy. You want to get sued?
Yeah. It's great. I'm going to keep saying it. So,
please do. Please do.
Yeah. So speaking of the verbal deluge of Lord of the Rings references that I'm doing right now, I really got like Hobbit vibes from this from this palaver they're having? Like, because this isn't it described? I don't have the text at my fingertips, but isn't it like the Elaine and Cuthbert and Susan are sort of like piled on to this bench together in a way where they're like all touching? Is this true? Yeah.
It's described as kind of like a girl and her two protectors, like her two older brothers, like several times it's described that way.
Yeah.
Which is really interesting.
It is. It reminded me of this sort of like all of the like platonic touching that happens amongst the hobbits, where there's always, gentle hands upon the forehead and so forth, where, I mean, I think a lot of people take it as there being subtext that it's not platonic. I'm pretty sure that Tolkien intended it to be platonic. Regardless, in this scene, it is all just like physical closeness in a purely protective and supportive fashion. Sure, and it really reminded me of that like good Frodo Sam energy.
Yeah, and I like that because I think it contrasts with Jonas's and his team, where they're not doing any of that. With the exception of Jonas and Coral, which is definitely non-platonic in that kind of touching. Yeah.
Yes.
Great. I love it. All right, so the chapter ends with Roland returning Susan home, and they discuss Fin de Año, the closing of the year. And the chapter ends, as all chapters in this week's reading end, ominously as fuck. Whatever comes, we'll be together, he said. But above them, Demon Moon grinned into the starry dark above the clean sea, as if he knew a different future. Jesus King.
Yeah. Oh, man. I mean, so do we. I guess we're Demon Moon.
Yes, we are. We are an hour and 16 minutes into the show, and we are one chapter of 3 down. So we're going to move right into chapter 6, called Closing the Year. King begins this chapter with another beautiful little vignette about what May just looks like during Fin de Año. I love this because it's almost like it's not written in a poem format, like it's not structured like a poem, but he has this repeating phrase, closing the year, that repeats over and over again in between the paragraphs, which make it almost sing-songy, make it almost poetic. And I really like that. Yeah,
it's beautiful. Me too.
And then this is perhaps the most important part of this little thing, though. There is a sense, inarticulate, but very much there, that things have gone amiss this season. It is the closing of the year. It is also the closing of the peace. For it is here, in the sleepy outworld barony of Magus, that Midworld's last great conflict will shortly begin. It is from here that the blood will begin to flow. In 2 years, no more, the world as it has been will be swept away. It starts here. From its field of roses, the Dark Tower cries out in its beast's voice, "Time is a face on the water." Hoo, hoo, hoo.
Oh, yeah. The Dark Tower cries out in its beast's voice. It's so powerful. Yeah. I don't even know what it means other than being like really poetically powerful. It like calling out like via Ka, maybe. I don't know. Yeah. It's really great stuff.
And I love that this is like a feeling that everyone in town is getting. Like this inarticulate feeling that there's no reason for why it's happening other than this is the beginning of the end that we're seeing here.
Yeah.
And we get later in the text, Reynolds basically reinforces this and says like this is something that everyone's feeling. And he makes it textual. Like, yeah, I'm feeling there's something in the air that is making everyone kind of more jittery than normal. That's making everyone more uncomfortable than normal. That feeling of the closing of peace, that feeling of the beginning of the end is something that everyone here is feeling.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. It puts you on edge. I love this. I love this stuff. This is great horror stuff.
It really is. And this is kind of a weird chapter, Matt. It is a chapter of very short vignettes. It's the closing of the year, but as we said, it's also the beginning of the end structure-wise for our book. It's just a series of vignettes as all of our different characters make all of their final preparations as the climax comes. It's kind of like the calm before the storm. We're waiting for the shoe to drop, or waiting for everything to happen, and everyone's just making their final little preparations. And so we're going to move through a lot of this pretty quickly because it's just we're jumping around a whole lot.
Cool.
First, we catch up with Shimi as he's delivering the graph to the mayor's house, but we also see him meet up with Susan to fill the empty containers with fireworks and explosives. We then realize later that these will be used to light both the oil and the brush at the entrance to Eyebolt Canyon, so we've kind of seen now what Shimi and Susan's role in this whole thing was supposed to be, which is cool. Like, that's what we understand. It's an important role, but it's one that hopefully will keep them out of danger, or would have if everything went properly.
Yeah, or at the very least, it explains how they can be operating while the boys are locked up shortly.
Then we go to Reynolds, who is heading out to the Citgo to check on the situation. Then we cut over to Rhea, who is still enjoying things through the glass as it continues to kill her. Like, we also see that she's now wearing her dead snake around her head like a scarf. She's sewed its head back on and is wearing it. And then we see some children blow up a dog. Which is just like we're watching this town kind of like in a very Needful Things / Dairy kind of way, like start to destroy itself. Yeah,
just kind of like evil seeping in along the seams. Yeah, it's ugly. It's screwed up for sure.
Yeah, and to connect back to our bird imagery though. One of the person, as she's chasing away the boys that just blew up this poor starving dog, calls them, "Get out of here, you ravens!" And the boys fled, cackling in the bright afternoon. They did sound like ravens. So there's once again our bird imagery here, Matt.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Cuthbert and Elaine dig a ditch under the brush by the thinny and fill that brush with gunpowder. Then we are back with Susan, who is riding home for one final time. And this is the part of the chapter that I think we're going to spend the most time on here, Matt, because this time she's going into her father's old office, a place that she hasn't been since his death. And this time she looks at his ledger and realizes that over a dozen pages at the very end have been torn out, which basically confirms the suspicion that Roland first raised to her all those weeks ago. Pat Delgado did not have just an accident after a snake spooked his horse. He was murdered. And as she's struggling to figure out who did the murdering, look who shows up. And this is the where I think we really loop back to the wasting away of Cordelia here. Cordelia stood there in one of her rusty black dresses. The top 3 buttons were undone, and Susan could see her aunt's collarbones sticking out of the plain white cotton of her shift. It was only on seeing those protruding bones that Susan realized how much weight Aunt Cord had lost over the last 3 months or so. She could see the red implant of the pillow on her aunt's left cheek, like the mark of a slap. Her eyes glittered from the dark, bruised-looking hollows of flesh. So again, this is like the way Cordelia looks, the way Cordelia is described here is very similar to the way in which King describes Rhea and the ways Rhea is wasting away again. We've talked about like why this is happening to Cordelia, and we learn here that Cordelia was not directly responsible for her brother's death, or at least through the point of view of Susan, we suspect this, but was aware of it, right?
Yeah.
And so is it just guilt that's doing this to her?
I think it is guilt. Yeah. I mean, I think that this is the thing that's been eating at Cord the whole time. This sort of splinter in her conscience that's been driving a lot of her hate of Susan, actually. This sort of, out damn spot type mentality where, even if she didn't kill her brother, she has been complicit in it in a sense.
Yeah.
And so now Susan's very presence is this continual reminder of her part in this. And, she's tried to just, I think that maybe she thought that she could just, play along and maybe get a little reward for it and then be like, all right, yeah, well, I get, it happened. But, she, again, I said before, she doesn't have a lot of self-awareness. So I think that it has just continually eaten at her.
I mean, I think if you will recall the fight, one of the big fights that Cord and Susan had was over her wearing her father's shirt. Which is a literal reminder of Pat Delgado that Cordelia is forced to look at. And she doesn't want to see it. She does not want her to see it. And she plays it off as, why don't you wear one of these beautiful things the mayor sent you? And at the time, that was perfectly reasonable. But I think we see now that it was a little bit more complicated than that. I think you're absolutely right, that the death of her brother and her involvement in it is weighing on her deeply. And getting Susan out of the house is a way of getting that guilt away from her, pushing that somewhere else. especially because like one of Susan's defining characteristics is her love of her father. She loved her dad. She like loved him so much, and so much of who she is defined by that love of her father. She talks about him constantly. She brings him up. She wants to remember him. She wears his clothes. She like that. I can totally see why that's just eating away at Cordelia.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we cut again to Olive Thorne, who woke up from a nightmare, and she just, goes to sleep in her husband's bed with him, something she hasn't done in a long, long time, and for what will end up being the final time. And then she is going to tell him of her dream if he wakes up, but he doesn't, and we get to see the dream, Matt. The dream is a vast bird, a cruel golden-eyed rock that flew above the barony on wings that dripped blood. Wherever its shadow fell, there was blood, she would tell him, and its shadow fell everywhere. The barony ran with it, from Hambry all the way out to the Eyebolt, and I smelled big fire in the wind. I ran to tell you were dead. I ran to tell you, and you were dead in your study, sitting by the hearth with your eyes gouged out and a skull in your lap. Which is, of course, like exactly what happens to him, right? Like this is a prophetic dream. His eyes are popped out, his throat is slashed, and the rook skull is sitting in his lap.
Yep. I mean, literally prophetic. I think that there's even this implication that like some either the moon or the orb or both or some magical force is like descending on the town, and it's pressing all of this like horrible dream, evilness and bad behavior into everyone, and shit's about to just go crazy. Like I honestly think we're building toward just the the needful things scenario where just everything goes crazy as we ramp up toward that moment.
I gotta say, when I started this project, I did not think we were going to be referencing Needful Things so much, but I guess as it's your only point of comparison, that it makes sense.
It does. I mean, it is funny to me how people, a few times I've mentioned Needful Things and people will be like, oh, why that book? And I'm like, I don't know. I liked it a lot, actually.
That's a very good book. I mean, yeah, it's just not the one. It's not that when you think Stephen King, you don't think Needful Things.
Sure.
Right? Yeah. It's a good book. Yeah. I mean, so speaking of the bird stuff, we've been talking about how this stuff, these chapters are littered with bird imagery. I guess the question I have is why? Yeah. Because I mean, like the most simple explanation is because of the rook skull, right? Because this is all related to the rook skull, which is going to be used to frame up our gunslinger and his Ka-tet. But this isn't a rook. This is like the bird here is a rock, which is like a legendary bird, a giant bird of legend that is bringing death and destruction here. Why do you think that is the image used here?
I don't know. I mean, I guess all I can say is I wonder what further bird references we'll have. I mean, birds are often just omens, just, Sure. I mean, sure. I think when I was reading about, okay, well, what is a rook? Well, okay, a rook is something that was always treated as a bad omen. And so I think maybe you could view it as like a symbol of Ka, possibly. Like, just like if you just go through this section thinking of birds as a representative of the capriciousness of Ka, I think that might actually work pretty well, because like, Cuthbert has this rook skull. The rook skull is his little friend. Mm-hmm. It's the lookout, and then this is what's used to frame them, right? So it's like this is sort of Ka is always pulling shit like this, where you think like, oh yes, Ka is on my side, and then it's like, well, Ka was on your side to get you into this position, but now it doesn't need you anymore, or something. So
to go like fully Galaxy Brain with this. Why give Olive Thorne this prophetic dream?
Well, yeah, especially because it doesn't come to anything.
Yeah.
Like she has the dream, goes back to her bed, and then the thing happens that she dreamed about.
Right. So like, I mean, it's so funny here because the text is constructed. If he woke, she would take that as a sign and tell him she had dreamed of a vast bird, right? Like, if he woke up, she would have taken that as a sign that she's supposed to relay this information to him, but he does not. So she stays silent and then leaves, and then he dies. Which is not to say that, like, I mean, like, if my wife wakes me up at 3:00 in the morning and is like, I had a dream that you were dead in your office and your eyes were out, I would not be like, well, shit, we better get out of here. I'd be like, that was a nightmare. Go back to bed. So I'm not saying that like if she had relayed this information to him, he would have acted upon it. Probably not, actually, judging by the deterioration of their marriage by this point. But yeah, it is really interesting that like the moments in which the powers that be, whatever they are, bless characters with extrasensory knowledge. In the past, it has been because they wanted them to do something, right? Like Eddie Dean, when Eddie Dean had these prophetic dreams, it was because he was supposed to do something, and he was like being guided into what he was supposed to do and how he was supposed to do it to draw Jake into the world. This just seems like it's nothing.
Yeah, it's almost like, the White is sending, this is conjecture, of course, but the White is sending Eddie these messages to try to draw him towards some good outcome. But whoever is sending these messages is just trying to torture people. Because now, I mean, think about it this way. Like now, Coral wakes up the next morning, realizes that her horrible vision came true. Mm-hmm. Wait, did I say that right? Yeah, Coral. Olive wakes up the next day, realizes her horrible vision came true, and that she could have done something about it and didn't, and this now tortures her. So it seems more like this is a malign force just trying to torture people with these visions.
Cool, I like that. So the story then moves on from this, and it is officially now 2 days before Reaping Fair, aka 1 day before the shit's going down. And it talks about at this point, like all the carnival games begin, and it describes a pony train. And when that happens, something that has not happened in the story at all happens, Matt. Was the pony named Charlie? Eddie Dean asked Roland. I think not, Roland said. We have a rather unpleasant word that sounds like that in the high speech. What word? Jake asked. The one, said the gunslinger, that means death. Of course, this is a clever way of reminding us, the reader, about what char means. Like we're gonna have this repeated beat of char you tree coming up in the next couple chapters. So it seems important to just remind us, hey, remember what char means. Char means death. But it is also interesting how King breaks the narrative here. Like he breaks the structure of the story within the story to interject from the people listening, and he's never done that yet. Like the only time the story has broken is when we had a specific interlude. We called it an interlude. It's like it's signaled by the structure of the text that we're going to break from the story within a story and go back now. This has not happened yet, what happens in this chapter, and it's really interesting that he chooses to do it here.
Yeah, I love this. I think, it really reminds us and it cements that the story is being told out loud. Yeah. And I do wonder why exactly he's choosing this this is the time to be like, remember, this is a story that's being told out loud. Mm-hmm. I wonder if at some point soon it'll be, there'll be more back and forth with the audience.
Yeah. I thought about this for a while, and I don't have a really solid answer for you on that. I think it's possible that as Roland is approaching the end of the story and what we all know will be at the end of the story, he's getting more and more reticent to go on. And so like interjections from the audience are making their way into the text because we're hesitant to move on to the next thing. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I like that. Like he's talking about the pony train, then maybe he like pauses, mm-hmm. and then Eddie, to coax him to go on is like, oh, a train. Is it Charlie? Is it Charlie the pony train? Yeah. Weirdly, I think it is interesting. He doesn't say Blaine the pony train, because that's a reference that would make the same amount of sense, but then the subsequent Char reference wouldn't make whatever.
Well, anyway. Charlie was specifically the name of the train that pulled the kids around, and this is what this pony train is doing. So
good point. Yes, you're correct.
So Roland meets with Susan 2 days before the Reap. He's hidden his guns in the ground in a corner of the little shack they're meeting in, and he tells her, if something happens to me, grab them and ride out to Gilead to inform his father of what has happened. And I think this is cool, Matt, because like we know something's going to happen to him. We don't know for sure, but like we know that his enemies are moving against him sooner than he expects. So like, I think as soon as a story sets up if I don't show up here, if you come out here tomorrow and my guns aren't here, you know something's gone wrong. Get them and run, leave. You want to take bets on if Susan's going to do that?
I'm thinking not. Thinking that's not a very Susan move.
Yeah. It also cleverly looks like moves his guns away from his place so they don't get taken along with the rest of them, which thank God. Thank God.
Right.
So after they talk of love for each other and for their future and of Ka, of course, and this is probably one of the most tragic moments of the entire story to me, because we know the results of this and we know none of this is to be. The future they're talking about together is, of course, not to be. And of course, so does our storyteller, and our storyteller reminds us of that here, where it says, she held her arms out to him. Never had she looked more beautiful to Roland than she did then, with her hair spread about her and that haunted look on her face. He would think later. She knew. Some part of her knew. No more talking, she said. Talking's done. If you love me, then love me. And for the last time, Roland did. Oof.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking. I've really come to love, this thing that King does, where he just tells us that was the last time. No need for mystery. No need for puzzling these things out. No need for noticing in retrospect that was the last time. He just tells you what you need to know to feel the thing when you need to feel it. And at the risk of repeating myself, it works perfectly.
I can't get over the line, if you love me, then love me. I don't know why, like I said, I've read this book like 4 times before. I don't know why it has stuck out to me on this reading as much as it has. I think it's a wonderful little line, and I really love it.
It's a mild play on words, and it has a good sound to it. It's great.
And then, of course, you ruined it for me by, if you podcast me, then podcast me.
No, that's my best work. What are you talking about?
It is. We're going to put it on a mug. We've decided.
Yeah.
I love that because, it's one of those things that everyone will ask you about. No one's going to see you drinking a mug that says, if you podcast me, then podcast me, and be like, what's that?
Yeah. It's a Stephen King.
It's very complicated joke.
Yeah. I actually, on the other side of the mug, we should just print it's too complicated to don't ask. Yeah. Read The Dark Tower.
Yes, read The Dark Tower. So while Roland and Susan make love for the final time, Cordelia, who, as we've stated, has become increasingly unhinged, decides to make a stuffy gal out of Susan's clothes and then burns it. And this is, oh my God, Matt. So let it be done, Cordelia cried. The firelight on her face turned her tears to blood. Char you, tree, aye, just show. The thing in the riding clothes caught fire, its face charring, its red hands blazing, its white cross-eyed eyes turning black, its bonnet flared, the face began to burn. Cordelia stood and watched, fist clenching and unclenching, heedless of the sparks that lit on her skin, heedless of the blazing leaves that swirled towards the house. Had the house caught on fire, she would likely have ignored that as well. She watched until the stuffy dresses in her niece's clothes was nothing but ashes lying atop more ashes. Then, as slowly as a robot with rust in its works, she walked back to the house, lay down on the sofa, and slept like the dead. Holy shit. King just goes on tears like this where I have to read it all because it's just incredible, right? Just like the emotion and the feeling here, the little tiny bit of had the house caught fire, she would have likely ignored that as well. Like, it's just monstrous.
It's interesting because it's monstrous, but it's weirdly relatable.
Wait, what? Please explain.
Just like everybody has moments of sort of over the top intensity in their life where you can't connect to this sort of like insane hatred of someone who should be your loved one, maybe, but you can maybe connect to like the burn it all down kind of obsession feeling that this character is feeling. And they're acting out something that you might have felt at some point. I'll say that. Yeah,
this is like the mid-world version of like triumphantly throwing away all the photos of your ex.
Yeah. Yeah. And watching the fire. Yeah. Perfect.
So the chapter ends with the demon moon once again, but this time The demon moon grinned and winked one eye through what appeared to be a shifting scrim of blood. It's like getting worse.
We're falling into the hell dimension.
Mm-hmm.
Oh dear.
And we move into our final chapter of the week, chapter 7, Taking the Ball. Matt,
what's going to happen?
It's Taking the Ball, right? It's such an interesting chapter title because like the most obvious interpretation of that is the wizard's glass, right?
Right.
The grapefruit. They at the end of the chapter they have taken that back along with Rhea. But like it's also like it has a lot of connotation in here, you know, like taking the ball and run with it.
Taking possession of the ball. Yeah.
Right. Like they are like this is the chapter in which everything goes wrong for our gunslingers and almost everything goes right for Jonas and his team. Like, right. Yeah. This is if you're looking for to feel good about your protagonist and his friends, this is not the chapter for it.
For sure. Yeah. And yeah, it's interesting because taking the ball is almost on its face like the least interesting thing that happens in this chapter, but and yet, you know, it's the title. So
yeah. So in our game of castles, it's finally time for Jonas to make his move. And just like Roland wanted him to, Jonas does make the first move, right? He moves out behind the hillock first, but it's a really good move. It's a really good move. And this chapter is a disaster. First, we witness Reynolds murder Kimber Reimer, an act he enjoys so much because of like a simple misunderstanding in which Reynolds thought Reimer was making fun of him way back when they first met.
Right.
Like that, it's such a little detail that is totally unnecessary, right? Yeah. But it just helps you understand Reynolds as a character a little bit more.
Right. Just this guy's a shithead. Yep. Just to clarify that.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was interesting to me because, like, I was kind of surprised that they murdered Reimer. Like, I think I saw him as like an agent of the good man, and I was like, well, why would they have killed him? But now after thinking about it, I guess I realize he's more of like a self-interested party, and he doesn't really matter that much in the grand scheme.
Yeah, I mean, I think the conversation that he had with Jonas, you know, back in the back when they were like playing Chancellors, whatever. I think that was like that conversation almost signaled the end of Reimer to me because I think he protests a lot to being called a traitor to the point where like you can kind of see the writing on the wall where like we see what Farson and what Farson's men think of him as just like a person of convenience that they're going to dispose of as soon as possible.
Yeah. He just wants his position of power. Yeah.
Yeah. Then Mayor Thorin wakes from a dream, Matt. Another dream, and it's another prophetic dream. Shortly before 5 o'clock, Mayor Thorin woke from a terrible dream. In it, a bird with pink eyes had been cruising slowly back and forth above the barony. Wherever its shadow fell, the grass turned yellow, the leaves fell shocked from the trees, and the crops died. The shadow was turning his green and pleasant barony into a wasteland. It may be my barony, but it's my bird, too, he thought, just before awakening, huddled into a shuddery ball on one side of his bed. My bird. I brought it here. I let it out of its cage. Bird imagery once again, this one with pink eyes, which is very, very obvious.
And also it's a wasteland, not a wasteland.
Right.
Which is absolutely perfect. And I think that it's kind of great that we get this sort of moment of justice and sort of almost acceptance with Mayor Thorin, where he this is a guy who has not impressed us in any way at all. Zero. Yeah. But his ability in this final moment to be like, I did something terrible, and I'm acknowledging that for the first and seemingly only time, just before it's too late to do anything about it. It's kind of, I don't know, it's not like it redeems him, but it's a little moment of humanity, I guess.
Yeah. He recognizes, he takes responsibility, at least somewhat. It's my barony, but it's my bird. I did this. I brought this here. I brought this death and destruction upon my town.
Yep.
And here's a quote I just want to read. For no reason at all. Fly away, bird with the pink eyes and pestilent shadow. Fly away to wherever you came from and take the big coffin boys with you.
Uh-huh. That's an interesting word there.
Yeah.
It's big coffin boys.
So the thing about this is I tweeted about this on our Twitter because I was like, holy shit. And I don't know if I had just internalized this as one of the things to call them or if it was just a legitimate mess up. Like, I have no idea anymore. I have no idea where Big Coffin Boys came from. If somewhere in the back of my head I've remembered, because I honestly think this is like the only time that phrase is said in the entire book. And I just don't know anymore. And that's going to drive me crazy more than anything. Did my brain make this up or did it just pull it from a memory bank that I had totally forgotten about?
It's just Ka. It's just Ka that they be called the Big Coffin Boys.
It works too well.
Yeah, it infantilizes them in a way that they would hate. Absolutely. And thus it has to be their nickname.
I love it.
You know, another connection. So we've got like the pink eye floating over the city, floating over the barony. It really reminds me of the Eye of Sauron kind of roving over the land, bringing pestilence and death. I think that's probably a connection that's there to be made.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's no accident that Farson's symbol is a red eye, right?
Yeah, fair.
The symbol of the Crimson King is the symbol that Farson has adopted, and we'll see this because that is the symbol that Roy de Pape draws on the wall after he kills Thorin.
Yes. Yeah.
Speaking of which, Roy de Pape arrives and just super casually slits Thorin's throat, pops out his eyeballs, and then takes Cuthbert's missing rook skull and sticks it right in the mayor's lap. The frame job is complete.
Yep.
Good job, Cuthbert.
Oh, man.
I was very much trying to, I think you probably would have gotten there on your own, but like, I was very much trying to set up the rook skull as an important thing, but not overly important. But it ends up paying off in a very important way, right?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was done paying off when Jonas found it, and it was like, oh, this is evidence that they were here, you know. But this is even bigger than that. Actually, it screwed them over twice. Actually,
it did. Yeah. So then we cut back to the Ka-tet's bunkhouse, and Roland, Cuthbert, and Elaine are just casually going about their day, not worrying about anything. They, walk out of the house and they do their stretches because nothing's happening until tomorrow. And here's what happens. Roland is thinking, and he's thinking about Susan, of course, because he's always thinking about Susan. And he's thinking about Susan's tears as they said goodbye. And then he's thinking about the thing she said. Greedy old Ka, how I hate it, she had said. His instincts did not awake. Elaine's touch, which had sensed Jonas on the day Jonas had killed the pigeons, did not so much as quiver. So I think King has done this really important thing here, right? King has Roland thinking about a quote from Susan saying, greedy old Ka, how I hate it, in this same moment where both his instincts and Elaine's extrasensory perceptions fundamentally fail them. And that is, I think, him very cleverly drawing a line for us, right? Clever, like saying, King's thinking about Ka, then everything that could possibly go wrong goes wrong. And so you, the reader, can say, it's Ka fucking with them. It's greedy old Ka that Susan hates fucking with them. Yeah,
it's great. I mean, it's such an important moment. I think it's like this just couple of sentences you just read. I think this might be the sentence, the part of the story that I've thought back on the most this last week. I mean, as we've said, Ka protects Roland when it suits the needs of Ka, and then it throws Roland under the bus when that suits it.
Yeah.
And, I think the touch as well, but both of these sort of forces just completely betray our heroes here.
Yeah. I think we were talking about this before the show started, but Roland saw like a reflection of Jonas from like 20 yards out laying in the grass last time he left his house. Elaine was just like hanging out, counting some horses, and felt something going on back at their place, probably a couple miles away. There are 8 men surrounding them right now, everywhere. One's on the roof. They're in the grass all around them, and none of them notice it at all.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I think I would notice if there were 8 men surrounding my house. So yeah, no, it's downright funny when it happens. Like maybe I'm not supposed to feel that way, but like like especially the way they like stroll out of the house and they're like wisecracking between themselves.
Yeah.
And then they get drawn down on and they're like, ah, shit. You know, you're just like, what the hell, guys?
Yeah.
It's great.
Yeah, so they get the drop on them. 8 people descend and take them into custody, charging them with the murder of the mayor. Their hands are bound with esposas, which, fun fact, Matt, means both handcuffs and spouse in Spanish.
Excellent.
Yeah. There's this moment I really like here where Roland thinks, not taking any chances with us, Roland thought, and felt a moment of perverse pride. With it came a taste of something that was almost amusement. Bitter, though. The taste continued to be very bitter. This is such like a teenage reaction, right? Like to be proud that they see you as dangerous, even as they're carting you away. I think it's really wonderful.
Right. Finally, some acknowledgement. Yeah.
Yeah. And here's this other wonderful moment. The other 2 men yanked Elaine to his feet. He reeled a little, then stood firm as he was handcuffed. His eyes met Roland's, and Al tried to smile. In some ways, it was the worst moment of that terrible ambush morning. Roland nodded back and made himself a promise. He would never be taken like this again, not if he lived to be 1,000 years old. Oof.
Uh-huh.
And he never was. The end. Everything worked out. All right.
Yep. Good for him. Yeah. I mean, it is a cool character moment, but I think if we learn anything from this, it's that Ka will totally let Roland be caught unaware as if it needs to, you know, like you could call Nasher's ambush on the Ka-tet an example where Roland broke this promise to himself because they totally got ambushed.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's so funny. Like, it's so funny to compare these moments because, I just remember him chasing Nasher and Jake and Gasher. Yeah,
Gasher.
I just read yours without realizing
it was.
Gasher.
I was like, it's an orc name. Yeah.
Yes. And like how he almost trips over the tripwire, but like just so happens to see it, and we called that Ka at the time. Like,
right.
It's just so amazing. It's just so amazing the differences when it's on your side and when it's not. Yep. Sorry, buddy. So, this is my favorite moment in the chapter. Like, they're being taken away, and then Jonas shows up, and Roland is like desperately trying to talk to L'Engle and Deputy Dave, and like to like talk them out of what they're doing. Like, what are you doing? You betrayed your people. You betrayed your town. Why are you doing this? I'm disappointed in you. And of course, it doesn't work. And then Jonas comes in and he's confident in his victory and he's kind of gloating a little bit. And then there's this one moment, Matt, that this is a disaster of a chapter for our hero, but we can take this one moment and feel good about it because Roland squeezed Rusher's sides. The horse trotted towards Jonas, and suddenly Roland knew something. As with all his best and truest intuitions, it came from nowhere and everywhere, absent one second, and there and fully dressed at the next. "Who sent you west, maggot?" he asked as he passed Jonas. "Couldn't have been Court. You're too old. Was it his father?" The look of slightly bored amusement left Jonas's face, flew from his face as if slapped away. For one amazing moment, the man with the white hair was a child again, shocked, shamed, and hurt. I love it.
Yeah, yeah, right. It's like it turns this moment from a lose into a win almost.
Yep.
Like as far as Jonas is concerned, like this. I think like it's like it doesn't just ruin his day. It's like Roland has ruined his life by reminding him of this in a place where everyone can hear.
Yeah.
Now everyone knows his terrible shame, and like as good as this little victory felt, he's completely downtrodden and just like in shock almost. It's great.
Yeah. I mean, he like we go to his point of view after this, and he's like thinking about Roland's words over and over again. Like, you still live in exile and die as you lived, right? Like, it's so like Jonas gets so angry here, he almost just shoots Roland.
Yeah.
And Roland is like, ugh, I just shoot exile, shoot worm, shoot you failure. Like, it's just, it's so good. It's so good.
It's such a great,
he's lost. He has no reason to be confident, but like he recognized this thing. And like if we say here that it was Ka that led to them getting ambushed here, then we have to say that it was Ka that put this intuition in Roland's head, right?
Yeah.
It gave him this little nugget to just swipe it at Jonas in his moment of victory.
Yeah. totally. It's just such a classic sort of Roland moment of just, you know, verbal beat down on someone, even if it's from a position of weakness, it's still devastating.
Yeah, you're not in the West anymore, but you'll always be in the West. You'll always be a failure. Ugh.
Yeah. I love it. I want to learn his skill at just ruining people.
It's so good. I don't know, like, calling someone a worm. We read a book called Worm, and calling someone a worm, it's pretty harsh.
Yeah, very harsh. Yeah.
So
That's
good.
great. That's great. Shoot, you worm. Yes.
Yeah. So they cart the three of them away, and then elsewhere, Susan is woken up by the maid Maria in the middle of a panic. The mayor is dead. Those boys from Inworld have been arrested for it, and she better get out of the house now because they could be coming for her next. I love this moment. Like, who are they supposed to have killed? The mayor and the chancellor. Now get up, I tell you. They didn't do any such thing, Susan said, and only just restrained herself from adding, it wasn't in the plan.
Yeah.
I love that, just only just restrained. She's so shocked and taken aback by what's happened. Things have gone wrong. Things weren't supposed to go wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's the classic, an announced plan never is pulled off as stated. The funny thing is King is always announcing plans in the narration, and then they do get pulled off. And that's why this actually tricks us, I think. So anyway, it's great.
But then Susan, as we leave her for the week, realizes one thing. The Reap Night bonfire is tomorrow, and Hambry now has 3 fresh new stuffy guys to put on it. And she kind of springs into action, but we don't get to see what she's going to do.
All right. Cool. What's she going to do?
I don't know. I mean, I do.
Oh.
But
okay.
So having dealt with the gunslinger and his friends, Jonas and his Ka-tet move on to their other responsibilities. Rhea and the wizard's grapefruit. King cuts over to it by giving us this, Matt, this like little horror story vignette about a woman in Hambry named Teresa Maria Dolores O'Shiven, who has like a weird fetish where she gets naked and licks her floor.
Yeah.
So we see that Rhea is like watching this development and loving every minute of it. And I find this so utterly fascinating. Like, no kink shame, of course. Do what you need to do, but what?
Yeah. Well, I saw this as another sort of Stephen King obsession with the darkness thing. Like, again, only read a few of his books, but I've seen a bunch of his movies. And like, he just, a lot of his stories are about like normal people who have this one weird, extremely weird, shameful, crazy thing going on with them. Where it's like a terrible secret that they can't share with anyone. No one would understand it. And he loves putting characters in situations where like this little thing that's been kept tucked away just kind of grows and grows until it takes them over and it ruins their life. And I mean, I think first of all, that's the addiction thing. That is what an addiction is. It's a little shameful secret. It's a tiny thing maybe at first that you can keep bottled away, but it grows and grows until it ruins your life. And Rhea is like the part of King, or maybe the part of us that enjoys voyeuristically watching these people do their weird thing. I mean, I guess all of his books are basically little grapefruit orbs that we use to peer in on people's suffering. So
I love that.
What I'm saying is Rhea is a constant reader. So anyway.
Awesome. Well, now I feel terrible. Yeah. I like that. I kind of read it more as a representative of like Hambry's slow descent into like kind of losing their minds as the demon moon appears and is bleeding from its eyes, and the end of the beginning of the end is coming, and but I like that. I mean, I like it as just like another like realistically, Stephen King probably had this idea for a story about this woman that like has this insane fetish where she sends her kids off to do something and then gets naked and licks the floor, and he just worked it into a story somehow.
Well, yeah, sure. I think my honestly, my sense was this is something that this woman does from time to time and thinks of as a shameful thing that she has to hide. But ever since the weird Demon Moon thing, she like does it compulsively more and more often. That was kind of
she can't control it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I loved the line that, you know, she had been lucky enough or observant enough to not be caught in the act, but it was only a matter of time. You know, like this, I think that is a great tie back to addiction, right?
Yeah.
It's like you do this thing in secret and you won't be caught for a while.
Right.
But
you get more and more brazen, less careful. Yep, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So suddenly the ball goes dark as Jonas and his men arrive. They're here to collect it. Rhea walks outside looking basically like a skeleton, and she holds it up in a threatening way, basically signaling that if you try to take this from me, I will break it. And Jonas basically takes the opposite tactic that Roland took here. In fact, he specifically textually notes that there were some people you just couldn't threaten.
Should have listened to us, Roland. Yeah. Can't threaten somebody who is a monster and is just purely vindictive and childish.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's, you know, again, we talked about how paralleling, like making structural parallels allows you to point out more clearly character contrasts, and seeing the ways in which Roland and Jonas both confront Rhea and both handle Rhea basically entirely opposite of each other, I think is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great.
So Jonas palavers with Rhea, she has a great plan. Like, you need to take the ball. I understand that. Take me with it. And one of the things I love here, Matt, is like we were introduced to Rhea as this woman who, like, she was kind of like this wronged woman who had lived in this world where women are persecuted, and like she has very specific opinions on men, right? And that personality kind of went away because all she did was, like, she was being consumed by this grapefruit. And so we hadn't seen that side of her in a while. But now the grapefruit is dark, and what do we see poke up right again? Her opinions about men, right? And like, had she been afraid of them, these mighty coffin hunters? She supposed she had, but for God's sake, why? They were men. That was all. Just mere men. And she had been beating such all her life. Oh, they thought they ruled the roost all right. Nobody in Midworld accused anyone of forgetting the face of his mother, but they were poor things at bottom, moved to tears by a sad song, utterly undone by the sight of a bare breast, and all the more capable of being manipulated simply because they were so sure they were strong and tough and wise. Like, this is a return to the Rhea we saw at the beginning of the story here.
Yeah, right. She's come back to her senses, and it's again, like, it's sort of, I don't know. It's interesting, right? It's not like you're thinking like, oh yeah, Rhea's great. Like, Rhea still sucks, but it's like, this is a very human perspective, and it sort of lets you understand her. That's just my favorite thing about King when it comes to villains is he really does make you feel like, oh yeah, this is a person. I get this person. I can believe this person is real. They speak to something universal. And this is interesting. I love it.
I love this whole conversation a lot because King keeps cutting back and forth in perspective between Rhea and Jonas. And one of the things we're seeing is they both feel like they're manipulating the other, right? Rhea just has this long internal monologue where she's like, these men, they're so easily manipulated. And then on Jonas's side, he's like, oh, you think that the orb chose you, and that you are its chosen one, and that you're, like, she says, don't worry about me, I've got a lot of life left to live. And he's like, I doubt that. So they both feel like they're manipulating the other and getting the better out of this deal. And it's not entirely clear which one of the two of them is right about it.
It's true, because we don't really know how supernatural Rhea is. For all we know, she can just keep turning into Gollum forever. like who's to say she's going to drop dead rather than just kind of turn into a lich, you know? I mean, I'm not going to make bets either way, but maybe she knows something he doesn't. We're not sure.
Yeah. But it works. She goes with them with the ball. Yeah,
right. Which, I mean, it's interesting because once Jonas touches the orb and realizes that he doesn't even want it because it's like cursed, then it's like, oh, okay, well then now it makes sense to all parties that Rhea stick around.
Yeah. So the Coffin Boys fix up Rhea's cart and take her with them to Seafront. All of Roland and Susan enemies are now all lined up together against them. And I just love this part, like, it's the classic team up moment, right? Where the chapter literally ends on like evil laughter, right? If you meet him, Jonas said, getting down to help hitch DePape's horse to the black cart, it'll be in a place where no magic is needed to see far. She looked at him frowning, and then a sly smile slowly resurfaced. Why, I believe our mare's met with an accident. Could be, Jonas agreed. She giggled, and soon the giggle turned into a full-throated cackle. She was cackling as they drew out of the yard, cackling and sitting on the little black cart with its Kabbalistic decorations like the queen of black places on her throne. It's like literally the supervillain going, ah, ha, 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 ha. Like it's so like it's tying into that trope, but in I think just a wonderful way.
It works perfectly. It's perfectly executed. I mean, I think I haven't said this in a couple weeks, I think, but like so much of the Hambry section of the story is just a trope being executed flawlessly. Like, like the whole showdown in the saloon was just like, that's the saloon showdown trope, but I've never seen it done better, you know, like that. And that's what makes it awesome. So yeah, as you say, it is that trope. Absolutely. But who cares? It's great. Yeah.
So Rhea has joined the Jonas Ka-tet.
Yeah. So
and as you said, the oi.
She's the oi. She's
sure.
Yeah. I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know, man. We'll see.
We'll see. All right, and that is it for this week. So much ominous stuff, and we'll kind of see. We're heading into the climax, Matt. So next week, it's gonna get crazy.
I hope so.
All right, let's move on to the audience discussion questions. I'm moving us fast here because we got a lot of answers to this question. Okay. A lot of great answers to this question, Matt. I was not sure how this one was going to be received, and I think the discussions that you guys had was really wonderful. So thank you so much for everyone who submitted a question. So last week we asked, in what ways has Gunslinger Society brought about its own destruction? And first up, we have Megafire7, who gave an opinion that I think a lot of people actually echoed. Any gunslinger apprentice that is just the slightest bit overconfident is exiled, leaving any potential rebel with an easy supply of skilled warriors with a grudge against Gilead. So yeah, a lot of people said that it was the sending of people west that was kind of the stupidest thing the gunslingers were doing. And I agree with this. I do think, probably back in the heyday of gunslingerdom, like society revered gunslingers so much that these people were truly exiled in a way that no one would work with them. They'd know them as failed gunslingers, and no one would be interested in them at all. Mm-hmm. And I think that the sheen of gunslingerdom has kind of faded a little bit, and that is why these exiles can suddenly command respect amongst certain people.
Yeah, that makes some sense. You could also say that if the rejects are all systematically overconfident and underskilled, then hey, we should be able to beat them in a fight. But but that's not reliable. That's not a reliable policy for national security.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Sosation says, to get all Marxist on it, Gunslinger Society has midworld bouginess. Gilead was the seat of the high classes. Farson represents the voiceless underclass's desire for change. The concrete reasons for this are never explicitly stated, but it's safe to assume that there were many small unseen injustices, tiny evils, as Cy King likes to work with, built up over time. The kind that Walter O'Dim loves capitalizing on. Unseen by the hegemony in Gilead, the gunslingers, but seen by those elsewhere in Midworld. People do what is in their best interest, and if they felt they weren't being served by Gilead and what it stood for, then it's a normal response to find aid elsewhere. If historical progress is all about class struggles, then it would be no different in a post-Arthurian Midworld. They say, you guys spoke a podcast or two ago about the women in Hambry being an underclass of sorts, and I think that speaks to one area of these type of injustices. We can extrapolate that there are countless variations and forms of these throughout Midworld, but also, obviously, the Crimson King and magic and Ka and stuff, too. Let's not forget the world this story is taking place within. I love that. That's great. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the reasons why I wanted to ask this question, Matt, is kind of not just the how, but the why, right? Like, King has made a choice here to make our beloved protagonist representative of a form of government or control that is directly opposed to a democratic revolution. Farson represents, and this is just a dodge and a hustle, obviously, because we see he's poisoning children in order to get his way. But this is a stated revolution for democracy. I think we had some people in our Discord say like, hey, like, those are good things.
Right.
like democracy, freedom, these are things that we value, and yet they're things that are standing in opposition of our people, our characters, and it is such a fascinating choice to make.
Sure. I think it's great that this world, the world building feels like it hasn't really told us that much about what Gilead is like and what this world is like, but Sosation can craft this really thoughtful answer with a lot of evidence, and you're like, oh, we've actually learned a lot about how this world works. It just doesn't really feel like it, because it's never in like an info dump. I think that's really great.
Yeah. So the Amazing Duck 42 says, I believe the central struggle in the Dark Tower series is order versus chaos. However, the people in Midworld don't see it like that. Instead, they see the struggle as progress versus tradition, or as a class war, both ideas that were masterfully spun by Walter Farson, others. This perception of the struggle will affect how people behave, like so many of the characters in Magus. They're not evil, but fall onto the side of evil because of how they have been purposefully misled. So with that framework, when Roland was young, gunslingers were still powerful, and moreover, they were the gentry class of Midworld. They lived in mansions and castles, were trained by private tutors, obviously had money, etc. History has taught us that the non-ruling class dislikes that dichotomy, to put it mildly. So the gunslingers' unwillingness to bend and adapt to the rapidly changing world means that they are easy targets for an unhappy populace, and their traditions are exactly what gives Farson the gap in the armor to plunge the knife. Eat the rich, so they say.
That's interesting, because we actually persisted with a rich poor dichotomy for like 2,000 years before we actually started having revolutions. But I see the point, obviously. It's the reason I say that, not just to make a weird historical nitpick, but to say like, why did this happen now instead of previously? And I think that has to do with like the waning power of Gilead, maybe as a geopolitical force for other reasons, maybe.
And we can get tower-ific about it too. Yeah. Something is happening to the Dark Tower. Things are breaking down, and maybe that's part of it, right?
Yeah.
Maybe the power of the tower. Tower power supports gunslingers. Yeah. Tower power go away. Yeah, or gunslingers go away.
Sure, or it just supports the status quo. And
Yes.
Interesting. Cool. Moving on. Idolin Jones says that they noticed a lot of similarities between the Gunslingers and the fall of the Jedi Order in Star Wars. They're both long-standing organizations in positions of power and respect who shoot themselves in the foot by casting out their own apprentices. Apprentice gunslingers who fail are sent west like Jonas, despite still having all their training, while Jedi who feel the pull of the dark side are scolded and punished instead of being embraced and rehabilitated. Then Martin appears as an insidious Palpatine-esque figure who clearly is in a position of power in Gilead, despite having his own agenda. The good man and his army are similar to the Separatists, wanting to be free of the Republic/affiliation. Oh, so King stole all these ideas from the Star Wars prequels, is what you're saying?
Okay. The Star Wars prequels stole this idea from King, sir.
Right.
Look at the timeline.
I know. I just wanted to piss you off.
Well, you succeeded. Next up, we have Megs, who also relates this to the Jedi Order. They say they are peacekeepers and treat their trade like a religion. And like the Order, I think they were very arrogant and thought, there's no way that we can fall. We are too powerful. They were too arrogant to see what was going on under their noses until it was too late. They didn't think about how small towns like Magus may be helping the other side. Why would they? What could they do to doom Gilead, a powerful city many miles away? The Gunslingers and the Jedi thought they were practically invincible and went down because of it.
Cool.
Love it.
Yeah, I agree. I didn't think of the Jedi comparison, but that makes a lot of sense. Drew Dandelion says, number one, the honor culture of the Alliance, coupled with how the affluent in society are treated so much better than the average people, led to this. The way women are treated, the way Shimi and any other special people are treated, even the way Roland seems to look down on average people, is disquieting and downright cruel at times. This type of treatment is just the sort of thing that would push a society collectively towards a different way of life. And number two, The good man promises democracy and an option for these disenfranchised people to at least think that they have power and impact on the world, instead of just being pawns. What the good man really plans don't exactly matter to them, at least as far as they can tell. So they say, not to mention how much better off those traders seem financially and emotionally. They really feel like they are being better cared for by the good man than by the affiliation. And this is due to entirely how they're being treated by the affiliation. And, why would they crave for and want a different way of life unless they're miserable with the status quo? So, I mean, I like a bunch of points highlighting the fact that the status quo seems really bad for a lot of people, and so anybody preaching a populist message of democracy is going to be welcomed with open arms. So I think, just like, once again, this is the point, is that the affiliation has been falling down on the job, leaving a gap for this sort of move.
Yeah, and the one sentence that Drew said that I liked so much that you didn't read was, "The world is moving on after all, and the people must too." And I think that's fascinating, because you were kind of musing about, like, why now?
Yeah.
And it might just because times have gotten tough. Like, when food is plentiful, when times are okay, people are much more content with a certain form of government, a certain form of rule, right? Like, you're much less angry at the gentry, like, if things are going okay.
Yeah.
if you have food, if there's food on your table, it doesn't really matter what the rich aristocrats are doing. But if my food goes away, then I start to get angry.
Yeah.
And I think, like, the world moving on has changed Midworld in ways that, like, are kind of slowly rippling out. And we're kind of seeing this, even at this time, Roland is seeing this slow collapse of this world. And with that slow collapse comes troubles. And with troubles comes people who are whose needs are not being met. And then they look at those people that are supposed to serve them and are like, hey, what's going on here?
Yeah.
And then someone else comes along and says, I'll give you a chicken. You'll have food.
Yeah,
and choice.
I like that. Yeah, I read this argument sometime in just the last week or two that both the French Revolution and the American Revolution were fundamentally caused by poor tax policy in both cases, which very much reminds me of, like, these boys came into Hambry looking to do, like, a count of the horses for the taxation, right? Yeah, literally for tax purposes. And, like, how obnoxious does that have to be for these kids to come in from Gilead? Like, you've never even seen anybody from Gilead. You've never been to Gilead. What's Gilead ever done for you? And they're here to count your horses to tax you, right? Like, it's funny how little of attention was drawn to that. But I think that's a perfect example of the kind of thing that people are annoyed with.
And they're children, right?
Yeah.
They're not even they're kids. They're not men. They're not adults. They're kids. Because you're just this backwater village. No one gives a shit about you.
Yeah.
But we're gonna take your shit if we need it.
Exactly.
All right. Next we have T Pickles, which I'm just assuming is Tommy Pickles from Rugrats. I don't think we need any confirmation on that. Just make the assumption. Tommy says, I think the lack of communication and cohesion between in and midworlds is pretty problematic. It's pretty easy for people to abandon an ideal or tradition that hasn't ever seemed to do anything worthwhile for them. If the men of Magus can't think of anything useful that the affiliation has provided, why would they care about betraying the idea of it? If they see the affiliation, especially these three brats from Inworld, as fancy, spoiled, lazy folks who are happy to laze around and depend on the profit from the working of others, then why would they work to uphold it when the other side is offering substantial benefits? That's kind of exactly what we're talking about, and I love that.
Yeah. They stole our idea that we were just talking about.
Yeah,
no.
They went back in time and stole it. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because a lot of these answers are making me, like, more focus on things that I hadn't really thought about, actually, related to just sort of the waning of the power and the overzealous sort of authoritarian nature of the affiliation. Cool. Mm-hmm. All right. Stephen D says that they always got the impression that Gilead was like a capital for the region, having strong leadership, fancy parties, and gunslingers. All great empires eventually fall, right? Perhaps they lost touch with the surrounding townships. Feeling their best interests were not being served, Farson was able to capitalize on this, stumping through the land to gain support for a revolution. I tend to feel that like gunslingers were similar to the Jedi, keepers of the peace, not soldiers. Gunslingers tried to stop the revolution, but were spread too thin and couldn't keep up. Throw in Martin, the wizard man on the inside, and all goes to hell. So yeah, another Jedi and Palpatine comparison.
Yeah, love it. Lynette B says, the discussion question is probably the key to my lasting fascination with the series. Every time I reread the series, the question of what happened here lies under the surface of the plot, like an undertow pulling the reader away from the individuals we follow and into the world that has moved on at large. Did the Gunslinger Society collapse like Tsarist Russia or like France before the Revolution? Too much disconnected wealth at the top? There seems to have been some kind of drastic loss in resources, with those at the top of Gilead feeling it at both last and least. Eventually, the greater numbers of those who suffer will overpower those whom they see as immune to their plight, especially if there is an absence or failure of technology that would aid the few in overpowering the many. Societies where power is limited to the special few whose specialness is arbitrary can only last up to a certain size. Maybe Midworld just got too big.
Cool.
It's really great.
Yeah, I love that. I love that sentence. The undertow pulling you away from the characters. Which I mean, I love the characters, but I've repeated myself many times. Like I'm just so curious. Like what's going on? What's with the Dark Tower? What's with this world? What is the world moving on? What caused this?
I'm going to read what Lynette says next because it has to do with Tolkien. So I know you're going to love it. I am also fascinated with what King might be saying about power that's in the blood. Given the Tolkien thread that Matt likes to pick up, it's interesting to think about the professor's feudal leanings. Lord of the Rings is structured around this world where some people are simply born worthy of kingship because of their blood. Theoden, Aragorn. Tolkien catches some flack for his apparent right blood makes the right people on the throne system, and I wonder if the difference in time between his early 20th century British writing and King's late 20th century American writing accounts for some of that difference. King seems to be saying that blood doesn't necessarily matter. Susanna and Eddie have no trouble becoming gunslingers. He provides a society that seems to follow some feudal structure, but which was destroyed by it rather than saved.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think it's very American to just sort of feel almost subconsciously, before, pre-rationally that, like, of course, our heroes come from among the people. That is what it is to be an American. Is to believe that is the way the world works, and being not just an Englishman, but a medievalist, someone who specialized in mythology and the ancient world and the stories of the old times and legend. Like, of course he's going to write those systems into his stories. He's not American. He's not going to write like an American.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think we talked at the very beginning about how a lot of this book, I think, is Stephen King trying to do Tolkien, but kingify Tolkien. And I think that is absolutely one of the ways in which he's doing it. He's taking this very, very dated, but I mean, I totally understand why Tolkien wanted to make this story about these people are just better than other people. That's just the way they work. They're just better. He's telling a very specific kind of story. But yeah, King doesn't have those leanings, and it's like, no, I want to tell my kind of story, which is about the common man.
Yeah, and I don't. I mean, I don't think those criticisms against Tolkien are invalid, but Sam and Frodo are not kings. They're clearly the protagonists of the story. Aragorn is just like this other dude over here. He's a major character, but he's a secondary character, and the story is more about just this middle class dude and his servant. So anyway, I don't. But
his servant is to be revered because he remains in his proper place.
Yes. I know. Look, I love Tolkien. Gonna stand. You know me.
Sure.
Moving on, Rebecca B says, from what I have been able to tell, Gunslinger Society is very feudal. And we know from historical feudal systems that they're very flawed, especially when it comes to the lower class of citizens. In a way, I believe Gunslinger Society itself was the problem, and Farson happened to be the one who capitalized on the unrest that was there, no doubt, just due to the existence of the system. Yeah, sorry, I think I screwed that up. We've been talking for a long time. I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yeah, this is a long episode. So let's move on to Eric T., who lists two things that a society like the gunslingers and the association need to successfully rule the world. One is that people have to see them as the civil authority. They uphold the rules and act as judge, jury, and executioner. Gilead is the seat of the empire and needs to be followed. Being under the thumb of a dictator frequently leads to rebellion, so they are asking for it and using this system, at least a little. The second is that it needs to be seen as the moral authority. They are the face of the white, and the vicarage needs to be respected. Being preached at can cause rebellion, but I don't know that they could do much more differently at this point. For their judgment to be seen as right and good is imperative. It's very true. So like there are two things that you need. They need to be the civil authority and the moral authority. And they are kind of the moral authority by their association with whatever this white thing is, right? But
yeah,
that still gets resentful.
Sure, right. I mean, there's this concept that I've heard used called like the mandate of heaven, where it's an abstraction where like if everything is going well in your society, then you say basically the leadership has the mandate of heaven, meaning we're okay with them being in charge because clearly they serve the good. But then as soon as things start going to shit, they lose the mandate of heaven. And suddenly these white knights who you were cool with being your judge, jury, and executioner no longer so cool because you no longer really believe that they are the servants of the white. And it's right, sort of this ineffable thing where, sure, those are servants of God when things are good. And then when they're not good, they're lying. They're not really. Yeah. So yeah, I like that answer. Cool. Mm-hmm. Devin says, the fact that Farson, the agent of this revolution, is basically committing genocide is almost beside the point. You get someone who says the right things to the downtrodden and they will follow. Hitler, anyone? It's a story as old as time. Gilead is remembered by Roland as a place filled with love and light, but Roland is basically a little lord. How might the common folk see it? We don't know. As with any feudal or caste system, there are haves and have-nots, and as the wealth inequality grows, so does the unrest of the common folk, opening the way for revolution. I mean, isn't that the story of every revolution ever?
Yes, it is. Next up, we have Corn Beaned, who says, there seems to be some societal issues that simply shooting the scum won't fix. I remember in The Gunslinger that Hax's co-conspirators talked about how odd it is to see children raised by the gun, as Roland and Cuthbert listen in horror because, well, they're raised by it. I've always viewed The Gunslingers as a critique of cops and the military here in the US, especially of now, and cowboys of old, if that makes any sense or if it matches up. It's a dying world as well. It's hard to salvage such a thing. There's also the allure of evil, though I can't evaluate how much of this it is the fault of the Gunslingers. Farson seems manipulative and seems to know what to say and do to get others on his side, which is true. But I think people have to be open to that kind of manipulation first. Yeah. And I think the reason it has to do with a lot of the other answers that we've been given.
Yeah, I mean, if I were going to try to turn people against the Gunslingers, I would instead of comparing them to the Jedi, who are like fundamentally like good-hearted but make mistakes, I would compare them to the judges in the Judge Dredd universe and just be like, look, like these are just murderers who are empowered by the system. Like they're just the jackbooted thugs of this system which is oppressing us. There's no need, you just deny them that moral authority that is sort of carried by comparing them to the Jedi. And I think that would work, honestly. So.
Yeah.
Jerome W. says, it has all the inherent flaws of any caste system. From the Gunslinger's view, it is romanticized. Gilead is beautiful. They fight for the white. We don't see much of lower society, and what we do see isn't so great. Even someone of importance like Court is living in a 2-room shack. The people of Magus are sending tribute to Gilead, but rarely see anything in return. In some ways, it seems like the colonies in 1775. The line of Eld aren't tyrants, but they aren't listening either. Yep. We made that connection. Cool.
Yeah. And lastly, we have Stephen P., who says, Gunslinger society, as we know it up to this point, has gaps where people can slip in. And that is exactly, all those gaps have been identified in the previous questions. And Martin takes advantage of it. So at that point, it becomes stagnant. And I think stagnation is one of the most interesting angles on this, right? I think that's kind of just what happens in a society after a while. Like you advance to a certain point, and then there's stagnation where the people in charge are content with the things the way they are. And then eventually the people that aren't in charge get tired of the things the way they are. and push for change. And either that change happens through the system or external to it. And that's like the curse of any empire or society or government or anything is stagnation.
Right. I think one interesting thread that I'm just kind of noticing as we go through these is like many, I mean, just correct me if I'm wrong, folks, but like most overthrowing of kings in history was some other dude deciding he was king, killing the first king and then saying, I'm the king now. Like that happened probably 100 times more often than somebody saying we're going to have a democracy. I think that we're going to have a democracy revolution happened like 4 or 5 times in history, and the I'm king now revolution happened like 1,000 times. So the fact that Farson is waving the democracy flag is actually quite distinctly interesting and unique, and speaks to specific things about this particular society and what its struggles are that are not just sort of the generic I don't know, ebb and flow of history that you see happen, throughout all of human history for thousands of years. I don't know. I don't know what to make of that exactly.
I will say that some of the we'll have a democracy now revolutions have turned into no, I'm in charge now revolutions. I mean, that's basically what happened in the French Revolution, right?
Yes.
Like
exactly.
That is honestly what normally happens as you overthrow the current, even if you overthrow the current leader with the idea of a democratically elected government. It is very easy for those governments in their freshly created forms to fall back into some sort of centralized leadership. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of actually a miracle that America didn't.
Yeah.
Like,
it is.
If George Washington had said, okay, I'm king now, everyone probably would have just been like, yeah, okay.
Yeah. I think that I was taught in school that they would have been cool with that mostly, because he was like this hero anyway.
Say what you will about George Washington. He was a problematic person from his time, but choosing to give up power is a thing that nobody ever does.
Yeah, right.
and he did it.
Yeah. And also
that's pretty remarkable.
It is. And also I think historically most successful like democratic revolutions are not bloody. They're actually like the King of England gradually signing away more and more of his power until he's like, what the hell happened? That's just one example. There's been a bunch of different ways of doing things, obviously, but it's interesting how, I don't know. I was thinking about all these things while we were going through these answers, and I was like, I do think it's worth mentioning just like how distinctly unusual it is for the good man to be this like populist proponent of democracy. Like that's not a common thing that happened a bunch of in history. I mean, sure. Yeah. Anyway, I don't know. Maybe people can correct me or shed more nuance on what I was thinking there. I don't know. Cool.
All right. Next week's question. This is going to be a fun one too. So we had like kind of the completion of our Ka-tets this week, both on the side of good with Roland and his group, and on the side of not so good with Jonas and his group, our 5-man Ka-tets, men and women. Sorry. So my question is, what are your favorite Ka-tets in other literature, in other storytelling outside of the Dark Tower? What are your, these 5 people groups? It doesn't have to be 5 people, but these groups of people interconnected. I think I've referred to it as the 5-man band before, Matt. I said that even before there were 5 people in it, and I was worried that that would spoil you, but didn't. So great. So what are your favorite Ka-tets in other literature? Try not to spoil too much.
Yeah. We trust you.
And definitely don't spoil anything from Dark Tower.
Yes, please.
That is always the rule.
Yes.
Nothing beyond what we've read this week. All right, so that is what that's it. That's it. This is like the longest episode that we've done so far, Matt. Yeah. I can't believe it. This was a shorter amount of pages than last week, and yet we talked for a longer amount of time.
We were not cautious at the beginning.
No, we were not. Next week, the reaping has come, as we will cover chapters 8 and 9 of part 3, come reap.
Remember, you can reach out to us via email at kingslingerspod@gmail.com or on Twitter at kingslingerspod. Of course, you can always head on over to reddit.com/r/doofmedia to participate in the threads.
Yeah, we appreciate. I think we get regular answers through all of those methods. So, and I'm doing a good job remembering to pull them. If we miss some of your answers, apologies. I miss them sometimes. But we thank you all for interacting with us. We got I haven't had a chance to read it all because it's very long, Matt. But we got an incredible email, at least incredible in the first half of I read, from someone from a tarot card professional who knows tarot, and they really dove into the cards from the Gunslinger and explained them to us in incredible detail. I think I want to circle back around to that, maybe on the recap of the book episode when we get to the end of Wizard and Glass, because I want to spend some time on that because it's really, really interesting.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, we love these answers. I'm sorry if my eyes stop being able to read at a certain point, and I screw up your answer, but I really do appreciate them, and they give us a lot to think about, and they really enrich this whole experience for us, and I think for everyone else too. Yeah.
I love the discussion question thing. It's wonderful. Thank you all for participating. And just email us, not about discussion questions. If you have something that you want to talk about, email us. I read them all. I don't always respond. Apologies, but I am reading every single email you folks send in, and I'm passing on to Matt the ones that I am allowed to. So keep them coming. It's great.
Yeah.
And if you are not already subscribed to Kingslingers, seriously, it's episode 26, folks. It's time to be subscribed. If you're listening to this episode, you probably have listened to the other 25. And it really honestly doesn't make sense why you're not subscribed right now.
They're subscribed, Scott. Don't worry about it.
Okay, well, good. Well, if you're not, we're on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else in the world you can listen to podcasts.
And if you like any of our shows and you want to support them, consider donating to our Patreon account at patreon.com/doofmedia. Special thanks to new patrons this week, Jamie A. and Shrey. Welcome. We hope to see you around the community.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. And of course, if you cannot afford to donate to us right now, that is absolutely okay. You can help us out by sharing the podcast, retweeting it, re-Facebooking it, re-Google Plusing it. Is that a thing anymore? No.
I don't think so.
Just share it. We really appreciate when you share it. And of course, you can always help us by leaving a rating and a review. This week's Spotlight review comes from Kavoso, who gives us 5 stars and says, "All around great pod. I decided to use this pandemic as a way to go back and read a few King novels that I had missed. I completely switched gears when I decided to reread The Gunslinger and found this podcast. Unlike some other Dark Power podcasts out there, these guys are contemplative, question and challenge the text in ways that I thoroughly enjoy. I have gotten my fiance into reading the series, and it has been really fun to read the books and listen to the podcast together. As we, both English teachers, try to get by during this insane times, these books and this podcast are a welcome distraction. Thank you so much for helping me to both see things that I missed on previous reads and articulate things that make the series worth reading again and again. I can't wait to continue to meet characters, experience the gut punches, and get to all the twists and turns of the series along with Scott and Matt." Wow. Thank you so much. Whenever we have English teachers say that they listen to us, I always get a little nervous, Matt, because I'm like, oh my God, professionals. We are not professionals at this.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I love having listeners who know more than me about things because I learn from them and become more powerful, like the Borg.
Yes. Like the Borg.
Mm-hmm.
So resistance. It's futile.
That's how I think about this relationship.
And please spread our podcast like the Borg.
Yeah.
Please.
Infect others.
All right, folks. We will see you back here next week as things are starting to get good. Remember, we're reading chapters 8 and 9 of Come Reap, Part 3 of Wizard and Glass. Long days and pleasant nights.
And may you have twice the number.